My own son slapped me across the face at my grandson's 6th birthday party. He looked at my worn-out flannel shirt, threw my handmade gift to the floor, and screamed that I was an embarrassment. He thought he was putting a foolish, broke old man in his place. He had no idea that the very ground he was standing on, the club, his house, his entire life, belonged to me. 1 week later, a federal judge took absolutely everything he owned. I am Cornelius, 73 years old, and before I tell you exactly how I dismantled my son's arrogant life, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that disrespecting the people who built you up should come with a heavy price. Now let me take you back to the day my family made the biggest mistake of their miserable lives. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon in Atlanta. I was driving my old Ford F-150. The rust along the wheel wells was a badge of honor, proof of decades of hard labor. I wore my usual weekend attire, faded denim jeans, heavy work boots, and a red plaid flannel shirt. On the passenger seat sat a wooden horse I had spent 3 weeks carving by hand. I had sanded every edge until it was as smooth as glass. It was for my grandson Leo. He was turning 6, and he loved horses. I pulled up to the Oak Ridge Country Club, a place where the membership fee alone cost more than what most folks make in 5 years. Valets in crisp white shirts rushed to open doors for European sports cars and luxury SUVs. When my sputtering truck rolled up, the valet actually stepped back, looking at me like I was a lost delivery driver. I parked it myself in the back of the lot. I did not care about the stairs. I only cared about seeing Leo. I walked through the heavy mahogany doors of the club. The grand ballroom was decked out like a miniature theme park. There were towering balloon arches, a massive chocolate fountain, and waiters carrying silver trays of expensive appetizers. The room was filled with men in custom-tailored suits and women draped in designer labels. And then there was me, an old black man with calloused hands and a flannel shirt holding a wooden toy. I spotted them near the center of the room. My son Julian, 38 years old, wearing a suit that probably cost $4,000. And next to him was his wife Chloe. She was dressed in a pristine white silk outfit, holding a glass of champagne, laughing with a group of wealthy investors. When Chloe saw me, her laughter died instantly. Her pale face tightened into a mask of pure panic and disgust. She quickly set her glass down and hurried toward me, practically jogging to intercept me before I could get too close to her high society friends. "Cornelius, what are you doing here?" she hissed, keeping her voice low but dripping with venom. "You are not dressed for this. People are looking." I smiled politely, refusing to let her disrespect get to me. "It is my grandson's birthday, Chloe. I came to give him his gift." She glanced at the wooden horse in my hands and let out a scoff that sounded like a dry cough. A wooden horse, really. We hired an entertainer who gave him a motorized miniature luxury car. He does not need scrap wood. Just leave it on the gift table in the back and please stay out of the main photos. You are making the guests uncomfortable. She did not even wait for my answer. She just turned on her heel and rushed back to her wealthy circle, creating a physical barrier between me and the rest of the party. But I had not driven all the way out here to be treated like a ghost. I saw little Leo sitting near the cake table, looking overwhelmed by all the loud noise and strangers. I walked toward him. "Grandpa," he yelled, his face lighting up. He hopped off his chair and ran toward me. I knelt down, my old knees popping, and held out the wooden horse. "Happy birthday, little man. I made this just for you." Leo reached out, his eyes wide with genuine joy. But before his small hands could touch the wood, a shadow fell over us. Julian snatched the toy right out of my hands. I looked up. My son was breathing heavily, his face flushed with anger. His jaw was clenched so tight I thought his teeth might shatter. "Dad, what is wrong with you?" Julian growled, stepping between me and Leo. "Look at yourself. You look like a homeless beggar who wandered in off the street. You are embarrassing me in front of my investors." "Julian, it is a birthday party," I said calmly, keeping my voice steady. "I just came to give my grandson his present. I do not care about your investors. I care about my family. That was the wrong thing to say." Julian's eyes darkened with a rage I had never seen before. He looked at the wooden horse in his hand, then looked at me with absolute contempt. "You call this a present?" he sneered. "This is garbage." He threw the wooden horse violently onto the marble floor. The sound of the heavy wood cracking echoed sharply across the room. One of the beautifully carved legs snapped completely off. Leo screamed and started crying instantly. The entire ballroom went dead silent. The music seemed to stop. Over 100 wealthy guests turned to stare at us. I slowly stood up to my full height. I looked at the broken toy, then looked my son dead in the eye. "You should not have done that, Julian. Pick it up." I did not yell. I did not curse. I just gave him an order the way a father corrects a disobedient child. But Julian was no longer a child. He was a man consumed by greed and arrogance. "You do not give me orders anymore," old man Julian hissed, stepping dangerously close to my face. "You are ruining everything. You are nothing but a pathetic, broke reminder of a past I am trying to erase. You make me sick." And then it happened. Without warning, Julian raised his hand and slapped me hard across the face. The impact was so loud it echoed like a gunshot over the quiet ballroom. My head snapped to the side. A sharp, stinging pain radiated across my left cheek, and I tasted the metallic tang of blood where my teeth had cut the inside of my lip. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Someone dropped a glass, and it shattered. Leo was sobbing uncontrollably now, hiding behind a table. Chloe rushed over not to check on me but to grab Julian's arm, looking terrified of a public scandal. Julian stood there, his chest heaving, his hands still raised slightly, as if he could not believe what he had just done. But there was no apology in his eyes, only defiance. I did not retaliate. I did not raise my hand. I simply turned my head back, looked at him with a cold, dead stare, and wiped the drop of blood from the corner of my mouth with the back of my thumb. I looked at my crying grandson one last time, turned around and walked out of the ballroom. I walked through the lobby, past the staring valets, and out into the blazing Atlanta sun. I climbed into my rusty Ford, shut the heavy metal door, and sat in the quiet heat of the cab. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. The red mark of a handprint was clearly visible on my dark skin. A son I had broken my back to feed had just struck me in public because he thought I was poor. He thought I was powerless. I reached into the pocket of my flannel shirt and pulled out my phone. I dialed a number I had kept on speed dial for years. She answered on the second ring. "Aisha." I said, my voice as cold as ice. "Yes, Mr. Cornelius," my lawyer replied, her tone sharp and professional. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the last drop of fatherly mercy drain out of my heart. "Initiate the financial purge," I told her. "The trust, the holding companies, the hidden accounts. Freeze everything. Cut the lifelines. Burn his empire to the ground. Let us see how he survives when he has absolutely nothing." The morning sun crept through the faded curtains of my kitchen, casting long shadows across the scratched formica table. I sat there in the quiet dawn, holding a mug of black coffee. My left cheek still throbbed. It was a dull, lingering ache from where my own flesh and blood had struck me the day before. Any normal father might have spent the night crying. Any normal old man might have wondered where he went wrong or begged the heavens for an explanation. But I am not a normal old man. I did not shed a single tear. Tears are for the helpless, and I was far from helpless. I touched the swollen skin on my face. It was a physical reminder of a broken bond. For decades, I had worked my hands to the bone on construction sites across the country, breathing in dust and breaking my back to give that boy a life I never had. Eventually, I built a commercial real estate empire from the ground up, buying abandoned lots and turning them into thriving shopping centers. But I always kept my wealth hidden. I lived in this simple old house because I wanted Julian to understand the value of hard work. I wanted him to earn his own way in the world. Clearly, my plan had failed miserably. I had raised an arrogant fool who measured a man's worth by the price tag on his suit. I pushed my coffee aside and opened my battered laptop. It looked like a piece of junk from 10 years ago, but the encrypted software inside was military grade. I pulled a small silver USB drive from my pocket and plugged it in. My lawyer Aisha had her forensic accounting team working through the night. They had dug into every single financial record attached to Julian and Chloe. The files had arrived at 5 in the morning. The software loaded smoothly, and I clicked on the master spreadsheet. I expected to see irresponsibility. What I saw was a financial bloodbath. My son, the man who wore $4,000 suits and laughed at my flannel shirts, was completely broke. He was worse than broke. He was drowning in an ocean of toxic debt. I scrolled through the lines of data, watching their fake life unravel before my eyes. Chloe had credit cards that were maxed out to the absolute limit across 5 different banks. She had spent $80,000 in the last 6 months alone on luxury handbags, exclusive spa retreats, and first-class flights to places she absolutely could not afford. Julian's tech startup, the company he bragged about in local business magazines, was a sinking ship. He had burned through millions in venture capital, not on research or product development, but on lavish office spaces, corporate retreats, and exorbitant salaries for himself. The company was facing a massive payroll deficit. They were weeks away from total insolvency. The luxury cars they drove to the country club yesterday were 3 months behind on lease payments. Their whole life was a rented illusion. It was a delicate house of cards built on arrogance and aggressive credit. But the numbers that truly made my blood run cold were located in a separate encrypted folder. 5 years ago, when little Leo was born, I secretly set up an educational trust fund for him. I seeded it with $150,000 to guarantee my grandson would never have to worry about paying for college. I made Julian a secondary trustee because, foolishly, I still trusted my son back then. I opened the digital statement for Leo's account. I stared at the ending balance, $0.00. Julian had systematically drained it. He took $20,000 here to pay for Chloe's European vacation. He withdrew $10,000 there to cover the lease on his imported sports car. He took the money meant for his own child's future and threw it away on absolute vanity. The man who slapped me yesterday for embarrassing him had robbed his own son, blind. A heavy silence filled my kitchen. The anger I felt was no longer a hot, fiery rage. It was absolute zero. It was the kind of cold that freezes a lake solid. I sat back in my chair and realized that the son I raised was completely gone. He had been replaced by a desperate, greedy stranger who would step on anyone to keep up his pathetic charade. Right at that moment, my cell phone buzzed against the wooden table. The caller ID flashed Julian's name. I let it ring, let him sweat. On the fourth ring, I answered. I smoothed my expression and prepared my voice to sound like the weak, naive old man he believed I was. "Hello," I said quietly. "Dad." Julian barked through the speaker. His voice was sharp and impatient. It was completely devoid of guilt. There was no apology for the slap. There was no remorse for humiliating me in front of 100 wealthy people. It was as if yesterday had never happened, or worse, as if he believed I fully deserved it. "Listen to me." Julian continued talking to me like I was an incompetent employee who had messed up a coffee order. "I am sending an email to your old account right now. There is an attachment. It is just a standard tax document for state compliance regarding senior citizens. I need you to print it, sign your name exactly where I marked the red flags, and bring it to my downtown office by noon. Do not be late." I played my part perfectly. "A tax document," I repeated, making my voice sound shaky and confused. "What kind of tax document, Julian? I do not understand these things. I pay my property taxes on time every year. Why do I need to sign something today? My head still hurts from yesterday." Julian scoffed. It was a harsh, cruel sound that echoed through the phone. "Oh, please. Stop playing the victim. You ruined my son's party. You embarrassed my wife in front of major investors. You owe me this. It is just a simple dependency waiver so I can claim a tax break for taking care of you. Just sign the paper and drop it off. Do not ask stupid questions. I have a company to run." The line went dead before I could say another word. I lowered the phone slowly, my jaw clenching so tightly my teeth ground together. I opened my email inbox and found the message from Julian. The attachment was labeled as a standard waiver. I downloaded it and opened the file on my secured laptop. It was 20 pages long. A normal, uneducated elderly man would have just flipped to the last page and blindly signed his name. But I am not a normal man. I read complex commercial real estate leases for breakfast. I know how to spot a trap. I scrolled past the distracting legal filler and found the core of the document. My eyes locked onto the primary clauses hidden in the dense paragraphs. My heart stopped beating for a fraction of a second. This was no tax document. It was a commercial loan agreement. Julian had forged my signature on the primary application pages and needed my final authentic ink signature to finalize the approval process. He was using my social security number, my clean credit history, and the physical deed to my house as collateral to secure a $2 million bank loan from a private equity firm. He was attempting to commit massive identity theft to save his bankrupt company, fully intending to let the loan default and leave his own father completely homeless in the streets. 2 hours after that phone call, I pulled my rusty Ford into the cracked parking lot of a Greasy Spoon diner on the desolate edge of town. It was the kind of place that smelled permanently of stale frying oil, burnt coffee, and cheap bleach. The neon sign above the door was flickering, buzzing with a sound like an angry wasp. It was a very strange place for my son, who only dined at 5-star restaurants with valet parking, to request an urgent meeting. But I knew exactly why he chose it. It was off the grid. It was far away from his wealthy friends and his fancy country club. He did not want anyone from his high society circle to see him sitting across a sticky table from his father. Before I opened my truck door, I took a moment to prepare. I hunched my shoulders forward, letting my spine curve just enough to look frail. I slowed my breathing and let a slight, uncontrollable tremor enter my hands. For 40 years, I had negotiated with cutthroat real estate developers and ruthless city planners. Acting was just another tool in my arsenal. Today, I was going to give the performance of a lifetime. I was going to be the pathetic, confused, terrified old man they desperately needed me to be. I shuffled through the dingy glass doors. The diner was mostly empty, just a few tired truck drivers staring into their mugs. I spotted my family in a dark corner booth near the back restrooms. Julian was wearing a sharp navy suit, looking completely out of place against the cracked vinyl seats. He was bouncing his leg nervously, a thin layer of sweat shining on his forehead. The cracks in his wealthy facade were beginning to show. His company was bankrupt and panic was setting in. Chloe sat next to him, wiping down the table with an antibacterial wipe, her face twisted in a mask of absolute disgust. Sitting across from them was a man I did not recognize. He wore a cheap, ill-fitting gray suit and kept nervously tapping his fingers on a worn leather briefcase. He looked around the diner like he expected the police to raid the place at any second. I shuffled over to the booth and slowly slid into the seat next to the stranger. Julian did not even say hello. He did not ask how my cheek felt after he struck me in front of 100 people the day before. He did not offer to buy me a cup of coffee. He just slid a thick, heavy stack of papers across the sticky table. "Sign it," Julian commanded, his voice tight and impatient. "Right here at the bottom of the first page, and then initial the next 15. This is Mr. Vance. He is a notary. He is just here to witness the signature so we can get this filed with the state today." I looked at the sweating man in the gray suit. A notary, of course. Julian was not just trying to trick me into signing a $2 million fraudulent loan. He had brought a corrupt, paid-off notary to stamp the documents and make the identity theft look completely legal and binding. I stared at the thick stack of papers, letting my hands shake violently as I reached out to touch them. "Julian, I do not understand," I said, making my voice sound weak, reedy, and full of confusion. "You said this was just a tax document on the phone. Why is it so thick? Why do we need a legal notary for a simple tax form?" Julian gritted his teeth, clearly annoyed by my hesitation. "It is standard financial procedure, Dad. The laws changed this year. Stop making everything so difficult. Just pick up the pen and sign your name on the dotted line so I can get back to my office." I pulled my hand back, clutching it to my chest like a frightened animal. "I do not know, son. I feel like I should read it first. It is a lot of pages." That was when Chloe finally lost her patience. The fake high society smile she usually wore vanished entirely. It was replaced by the ugly, greedy truth of who she really was. She leaned aggressively across the table, getting right in my face. Her eyes were cold, dead, and entirely devoid of human empathy. "Listen to me, you pathetic old man," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "You are going to pick up that pen and you are going to sign those papers right now. You humiliated me yesterday. You ruined my son's party. You owe us this." I looked at her, widening my eyes in mock terror, shrinking back against the vinyl seat. "Chloe, please, I just want to know what I am signing. It is my name." She slammed her hand flat on the table, making the cheap coffee cups rattle in their saucers. "Sign it, old man," she snarled, "or you will never see Leo again. I promise you that." The threat hung in the greasy air, heavy and toxic. I let out a shaky breath, playing the part of a devastated, heartbroken grandfather. "You cannot do that," I whispered, letting my voice crack perfectly. "He is my grandson. He loves me. Watch me." Chloe sneered, a cruel, victorious smirk spreading across her face. "If you do not sign these papers right now, Julian and I will go straight to a judge. I will tell them you are violent. I will use the scene you caused at the country club yesterday as proof that you are aggressive and unstable. I will say you are losing your mind and posing a physical threat to my child. I will get a permanent restraining order and you will die in that rotting house of yours without ever seeing Leo's face again." The sheer cruelty of her words would have broken a normal grandfather. Using a 6-year-old innocent child as a bargaining chip to extort an elderly man into signing away his home and his identity. It was sick. It was deeply criminal. And it was exactly what I needed her to say. I let my lower lip tremble. I looked down at the table, forcing a tear to pool in the corner of my eye. "Please do not take my boy away from me. He is all I have left in this world." "Then sign the damn paper," Julian snapped, pushing a sleek silver pen toward me. I picked up the pen with a violently shaking hand. I brought the tip to the paper, letting it hover just an inch above the signature line. Julian and Chloe watched with greedy, desperate eyes. They were holding their breath. The shady notary leaned in, pulling his stamp from his pocket, ready to finalize the fraud. But then I stopped. I squinted hard at the paper. I pulled it close to my face, then pushed it far away like a man struggling to focus. I blinked rapidly, rubbing my eyes with my free hand. I cannot see the letters, I stammered, letting panic bleed into my voice. The print is too small. Everything is just blurry gray lines. Julian let out a loud groan of sheer frustration, throwing his hands in the air. "Dad, are you kidding me right now?" "I left my reading glasses at home on the kitchen counter," I said, looking at him with wide, helpless eyes. "I am sorry, Julian. My eyes are just not what they used to be. I cannot read the small print without my thick glasses. Let me just take these papers home. I will find my glasses, read them over, and sign them tonight. I promise I will do it." "No." Chloe barked, her face turning red. "You sign them right here. Right now." "I can't even see where the signature line is." "Chloe," I whimpered, "I do not want to sign in the wrong place and mess up your important tax forms. It has to be perfect, right?" Julian grabbed his hair, looking like a man on the absolute edge of a total psychological breakdown. The pressure of his bankrupt company, his mountain of toxic debt, and the fear of losing his lifestyle was making him unhinged. He looked at the notary, who just shrugged uncomfortably, wiping sweat from his neck. Julian slammed both his fists onto the diner table. The loud bang made a waitress drop a tray of silverware a few feet away. "Fine," Julian growled through clenched teeth. He snatched the thick stack of fraudulent loan documents and shoved them roughly into my chest. "Take them. Go home, find your stupid glasses, and sign them. But listen to me very carefully, old man. You have exactly 24 hours. If I do not have these signed papers on my desk by tomorrow morning, Chloe will file that restraining order. You will never speak to Leo again. Do you understand me?" I nodded frantically, acting thoroughly defeated and terrified. "I understand, son. I will bring them tomorrow. I promise." In my feigned panic and trembling, the sleek silver pen Julian had pushed toward me slipped from my shaking fingers. It fell directly into the front pocket of my flannel shirt. I stood up slowly, clutching the fraudulent loan documents to my chest like a lifeline, and shuffled out of the diner without looking back. I climbed into my rusty Ford and closed the heavy door. The moment I was alone inside the cab, the trembling stopped instantly. My hunched posture straightened. The helpless, terrified grandfather vanished, replaced by the ruthless commercial real estate mogul who had crushed corporate sharks for decades. I reached into my flannel pocket and pulled out the sleek silver pen. It was not just a pen. It was a high-tech micro recorder provided by my lawyer's private investigator. I pressed the tiny button hidden on the metal clip. A small green light blinked, confirming the file was saved. Julian and Chloe thought they had just secured a $2 million lifeline by bullying a weak, senile old man. They had no idea they had just handed me crystal-clear, high-definition audio of criminal extortion blackmail and an explicit threat to file a false police report. The trap was perfectly set. Now it was time to let it snap shut. I drove away from that greasy diner with the fraudulent loan papers sitting on my passenger seat. I did not go back to my quiet neighborhood. I did not go home to rest my tired bones. Instead, I steered my rusty Ford F-150 straight into the beating heart of downtown Atlanta. The skyline rose up before me like a forest of glass and steel, reflecting the harsh midday sun. I pulled into the underground parking garage of the Pinnacle Tower. It was a 60-story monument to corporate wealth and power. The security guard at the gate took one look at my battered truck and stepped out of his booth to wave me away. He assumed I was a lost janitor or a confused delivery driver. Then he leaned closer and saw my face. He quickly lowered his hand, swallowed hard, and scrambled to press the button to open the VIP executive gate. I parked my rusting truck in a spot reserved for the chairman of the board. I walked into the private glass elevator wearing my faded denim jeans, heavy work boots, and red flannel shirt. The young executives in their tailored suits whispered and stared as I passed by them in the lobby. They probably wondered how a broke old construction worker had sneaked past the heavy security detail. They did not know that I did not just work in this building. I owned the entire skyscraper. Every pane of glass, every polished marble floor, and every ounce of concrete belonged to me. The elevator doors chimed and opened on the 60th floor. This was the command center of my hidden commercial real estate empire. I walked past the reception desk and pushed open the heavy oak doors to the main conference room. Waiting for me at the long mahogany table were the two most dangerous weapons in my arsenal. Aisha was my lead corporate attorney. She was a woman with a mind like a steel trap who had never lost a case in her life. Next to her was Victor, my chief forensic accountant. He was a man who could track a single missing dollar through a maze of international shell companies. They stood up immediately when I walked into the room. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the sleek silver pen, and tossed it onto the polished wood table. It slid to a stop right in front of Aisha. I also dropped the thick stack of fraudulent loan documents next to it. "My son wants me to sign away my life by tomorrow morning," I said, pulling out a heavy leather chair and sitting down. "And my daughter-in-law was kind enough to explain exactly what will happen if I refuse to cooperate." Aisha picked up the pen with a grim, knowing smile. She connected it to her secure laptop and extracted the hidden audio file. Victor leaned in closer to his monitors as she pressed play. The high-definition recording filled the quiet conference room. Every single word from that dirty diner was crystal clear. Julian's impatient demands echoed through the speakers. The corrupt notary nervously shuffling his papers could be heard in the background. And then Chloe's vicious voice filled the air. "Sign it, old man, or you will never see Leo again. I will tell them you are violent. I will say you are losing your mind. I will get a permanent restraining order." Aisha paused the recording. The silence in the room was heavy and suffocating. Victor took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose in absolute disgust. "They really did it," Victor said, shaking his head. "They actually handed you the exact legal rope you need to hang them." Aisha looked at me, her eyes sharp and predatory. "Cornelius, this is no longer just a civil matter regarding stolen trust funds. What we just heard on this tape is criminal extortion. It is premeditated blackmail. It is felony elder financial abuse. And the presence of that paid-off notary makes it a coordinated criminal conspiracy. If we hand this audio file to the district attorney right now, Julian and Chloe will be arrested and thrown in a holding cell before dinner. They are looking at a minimum of 10 years in federal prison." I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling city below. "No," I said softly. "Not yet. Arresting them today is far too easy. If they go to jail right now, they will just play the victims. They will hire a defense lawyer, spin a fake story about a family misunderstanding, and try to secure bail. I want them to feel the exact same terror and total helplessness they tried to inflict on me. I want them to burn their own bridges so thoroughly that not even ashes remain. Let them think they are winning. Let them think their pathetic plan is moving forward perfectly. When we finally drop the hammer, I want them to have absolutely nowhere to run." Victor turned his attention back to his bank of computer monitors. He had been running a real-time surveillance algorithm on all public records, bank transfers, and financial databases connected to Julian. Suddenly, a bright red alert flashed across his primary screen. Victor frowned, his fingers flying rapidly across his keyboard as he opened the encrypted alert. "Mr. Cornelius," Victor said, his voice dropping an octave filled with sudden tension. "We have a massive escalation. Julian did not just stop at the fraudulent commercial loan." I turned my chair to face him. "What did he do now?" I asked. Victor swallowed hard. "He just listed the South Carolina estate for sale on a private offshore broker network. He is pricing it severely under market value. He is trying to secure an all-cash buyer by the end of the week." My blood ran ice cold. My heart pounded heavily against my ribs. The South Carolina estate was not just another property in my portfolio. It was the ancestral home I had bought for my late wife, Clarice. It was the house where she spent her final days surrounded by her beloved rose gardens. It was a sacred place entirely untouched since the day she passed away. It held all my memories of her laughter and her warmth. "Julian knows he cannot legally sell that house," Aisha stated quickly, pulling up the property deed on her tablet. "Your name is the only one on the title. He does not have the legal authority to authorize a transfer of ownership." Victor looked up from his screen, his expression grim and completely serious. "He knows he does not have the authority," Victor explained. "That is why he filed an emergency petition in family court exactly 1 hour ago. He is officially suing for a full medical conservatorship over you." The room went dead silent. Victor pulled up the court filing and read the charges out loud. He submitted a legal claim under oath stating that you are suffering from severe advanced dementia. He claims you have become aggressive, that you are a physical danger to your grandson, and that you are entirely incapable of managing your own estate or making rational decisions. He is asking a judge to strip you of your civil rights immediately so he can assume total control of your assets. My own son was not just trying to steal my money to save his bankrupt company. He was trying to erase my legal existence. He wanted to strip away my basic human rights, declare me a mentally incompetent invalid, and sell the only piece of my beautiful wife I had left to the highest bidder. He was willing to lock me away in a facility just to cover up his own spectacular failures. A dark, terrifying calm washed over me. The father who loved Julian died the moment I heard that court filing. Only the businessman remained. I looked at Aisha and Victor. "My son wants to play God," I whispered, my voice echoing in the large room. "He wants to take me to court and prove I am a broken old man. Fine. We are going to let him step into that courtroom. We are going to let him stand before a judge and tell his beautiful, arrogant lies. And then we are going to drop the sky on his head, prepare the irrevocable trusts, move everything into the shadows, let him try to grab an empire made of smoke." I left the glass and steel fortress of my downtown empire and climbed back into my rusty Ford truck. The drive back to my property usually took an hour in the heavy afternoon traffic, but today I made it in 40 minutes. My foot pressed hard on the gas pedal. My calloused hands gripped the worn leather steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached. Julian was no longer just going after my bank accounts or my credit score. He was going after Clarice. The estate in South Carolina was not just another piece of real estate in my portfolio. It was a sacred sanctuary. It was the only place in the world where I could close my eyes and still hear my late wife laughing. Clarice had planted every single rose bush in that sprawling backyard garden with her own bare hands. I had promised her on her deathbed that her garden would always bloom, that the home we built together would remain untouched by the cold, greedy hands of the outside world. And now my own desperate, arrogant son was trying to pave over her memory just to save his pathetic tech startup from bankruptcy. I turned off the main road and tires crunched against the long gravel driveway leading to my house. The property was usually quiet, secluded by ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss. But today the peace was violently broken. Parked recklessly on the edge of my freshly cut front lawn was a sleek silver luxury sedan I did not recognize. I cut the engine of my truck and stepped out into the humid heat. I did not slam the door. I moved quietly, walking around the side of the brick house toward the backyard. That was when I saw him. He was a young man, maybe in his late 20s, wearing a sharp designer polo shirt and khaki pants. He was standing right in front of the wrought iron gate that protected the entrance to Clarice's rose garden. He held a heavy pair of steel bolt cutters in one hand and a high-end digital camera hanging from a strap around his neck. I watched from the shadows of the porch as he clamped the bolt cutters over the vintage brass padlock I had installed years ago. With a sharp grunt, he squeezed the handles together. The lock snapped with a loud crack and fell into the dirt. He carelessly kicked the gate open with his expensive shoe, stepping right onto my private property, as if he owned the very dirt beneath his feet. A wave of pure, violent anger flared up inside my chest. The old me, the man who had spent his youth breaking concrete and wrestling with ruthless construction bosses, wanted to march across that yard, grab that arrogant trespasser by the collar, and throw him headfirst into the street. But the new me, the man currently playing a high-stakes game of psychological chess against his own family, knew better. Anger makes you sloppy. Patience makes you lethal. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the hot air fill my lungs. I let my shoulders slump forward, curving my spine just a fraction. I relaxed my jaw and painted a blank, slightly confused expression across my face. I dragged the heels of my heavy work boots against the gravel path, making a slow, shuffling sound to announce my presence. "Hello there," I called out, making my voice sound reedy, trembling, and weak. "Are you the nice young man from the cable company? My television has not been working since Tuesday and I cannot find the news channel." The young man spun around, visibly startled. He quickly dropped the bolt cutters into the tall grass, his eyes wide with the guilt of a thief caught in the act. But the moment he actually looked at me, a frail-looking old black man in a faded, sweat-stained flannel shirt, his panic immediately vanished. He let out a loud, condescending sigh and smiled a greasy, confident smile. "Oh, hi there," he said smoothly, walking toward me with total arrogance. "You must be Cornelius." "No, I am not from the cable company, Pop. I am an independent commercial property appraiser. Your son Julian sent me out here to take some exterior and interior photos of the estate. He said you would be expecting me today." I blinked rapidly, rubbing my forehead with a trembling hand like an old man struggling to piece together a broken memory. "Julian sent you?" I asked, my voice wavering perfectly. "My boy Julian. But he did not tell me anything about taking pictures. Why does he need pictures of my wife's garden?" The appraiser chuckled softly, clearly amused by my apparent dementia. He looked at me the way you would look at a confused toddler. "Just standard procedure, Cornelius. Julian is just updating the insurance files, that is all. He mentioned you might be a little forgetful lately. Do not worry your head about it. I will just be 10 minutes taking some measurements." "It is an awful hot day out here in the sun," I said, giving him a wide, harmless, toothy smile. "Why do you not come inside the kitchen for a minute? I just made a fresh pitcher of iced sweet tea. You can take your pictures from the big kitchen window where the air conditioning is running." The young man wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead and nodded eagerly. He honestly thought he was taking advantage of a clueless, senile old fool. "That sounds great, old-timer. Lead the way," he said. I led him into the house, shuffling my feet across the hardwood floors the entire way. I poured him a tall glass of iced tea with a violently shaking hand, intentionally spilling a few drops of the amber liquid onto the granite counter to really sell the performance. He drank it greedily while pulling a sleek tablet from his leather messenger bag. "You really have a beautiful piece of land here, Cornelius," the appraiser said, looking around the spacious kitchen and typing numbers into his screen. "The commercial developers are absolutely going to love this plot." I paused, holding my own glass of tea with both hands. "Developers?" I asked, tilting my head like a confused dog. "I thought you just told me this was all for the insurance company." The appraiser froze. He realized he had slipped up and revealed too much. But he looked at my stooped posture, my old clothes, and my confused eyes, and clearly decided I was too far gone to be a threat. He let out a careless, arrogant laugh. "Well, I suppose there is no harm in telling you the truth, since you probably will not even remember this conversation by tomorrow morning anyway," he said with a cruel smirk. "Julian is not updating any insurance policies. He is selling the entire estate. He already has a massive quiet deal lined up behind closed doors with a major commercial investment group out of New York. They want to tear down this old house and bulldoze those gardens out back to build a luxury high-rise condominium complex." I gripped the smooth glass in my hands so hard I thought it might shatter into 1,000 pieces. "Tear down the gardens," I whispered, keeping my voice sounding fragile. "But my Clarice planted those." The appraiser took another sip of his tea, completely indifferent to the heartbreak of an old widower. "Yeah, well, business is business, Pop. Julian is moving extremely fast. He is desperate to close. Once I send him these final photos and the property valuation report tonight, the investment group is wiring a massive non-refundable cash deposit directly into his personal bank account tomorrow morning. He actually paid me double to rush the paperwork today. He said you are moving into a specialized mental care facility by the end of the week anyway, so you will not be needing all this empty space." I swallowed the bitter metallic taste in my mouth. I kept my face entirely blank, nodding slowly as if the devastating information was just floating harmlessly through my damaged brain. "That is very nice of him," I mumbled quietly. "Julian is a good boy. He is always taking care of his old dad." The appraiser smirked, finishing his tea and setting the empty glass down on the counter with a loud clack. "Yeah, he is a real saint. Anyway, I got all the data I need from the window. I will let myself out. Take care of yourself in that facility, Cornelius." I stood completely still and watched him walk out the front door, get into his silver sedan, and speed off down the gravel driveway. As soon as his car disappeared from sight, my trembling stopped instantly. My hunched posture snapped straight. The confused, helpless old man vanished without a trace, leaving only the ruthless Titan behind. I walked over to the counter and stared at the empty glass he had left behind. Julian was expecting a massive cash deposit tomorrow morning. My son actually thought he had pulled off the ultimate betrayal. He thought he could sell my dead wife's memory to a corporate bulldozer to save his own miserable skin. I reached into the pocket of my jeans and pulled out my phone. I needed to call Isha right now. I needed her to drop a legal nuclear bomb on that New York investment group and freeze the transaction before a single dollar could ever hit Julian's bank account. I dialed the first number, but before my thumb could press the second digit, a loud, violent knock echoed through the house. It was not a polite, neighborly knock. It was the sharp, aggressive, heavy pounding of law enforcement. I put my phone back in my pocket and walked slowly to the front door. I pulled it open. Standing on my porch was a tall, stern-looking sheriff's deputy in full uniform. His hand rested casually on his utility belt, and his mirrored sunglasses reflected my stoic face. "Are you Cornelius?" he asked. His voice was completely devoid of emotion, strictly professional and cold. "I am," I replied, keeping my eyes locked on his, refusing to show a single ounce of intimidation. The deputy reached inside his heavy tactical vest and pulled out a thick, sealed manila envelope. He stepped forward and shoved it roughly against my chest, forcing me to take it. "You have been officially served," the deputy said flatly. "You are legally required to appear in county civil court this coming Monday at exactly 9 in the morning. Have a good day, sir." He turned around and walked back to his marked cruiser without looking back. I stood on the porch, the heavy afternoon sun beating down on my face, and tore open the thick envelope. The legal documents inside were stamped with the bright red official seal of the state family court. I read the bold black letters printed at the very top of the page. It was an emergency petition for involuntary conservatorship. Julian had actually done it. He had officially filed the lawsuit to end my life as a free man. I scanned the vicious fabricated lies printed on the legal paper. The petitioner Julian claims under penalty of perjury that the respondent Cornelius is suffering from severe advanced Alzheimer's disease. The petitioner claims the respondent is prone to dangerous violent outbursts, is a physical threat to his minor grandson, and is completely incapable of feeding, bathing, or caring for himself. Julian was formally demanding that the state strip me of my basic human rights, freeze all my personal accounts, and grant him total unchecked authority over my physical body and my estate. He was trying to bury me alive before the weekend was over. I stood on my front porch with the heavy court summons in my hand. The blistering afternoon sun beat down on my shoulders, but my blood was running ice cold. Julian was officially accusing me of violent outbursts and severe advanced dementia. He was trying to convince a family court judge that I was a physical threat to my grandson Leo. But to make a vicious claim like that stick in a courtroom, a desperate man needs more than just a good story. He needs a signature. He needs a licensed medical professional who is willing to sell his soul and commit perjury. I did not panic. I did not waste time feeling sorry for myself. I walked back into my house, pulled out my phone, and called my private investigator. I gave him a single clear directive: trace Julian's vehicle immediately. Within 20 minutes, my phone vibrated with an encrypted text message. My investigator had locked onto Julian's location. He was parked at a private psychiatric clinic located in a highly exclusive, discreet neighborhood in the northern part of the city. I threw the court summons onto the kitchen counter, grabbed my keys, and climbed back into my rusty truck. I parked across the street from the clinic. It was a modern glass and steel building hidden behind tall, manicured hedges. It was exactly the kind of place where wealthy people went to hide their ugly secrets and purchase quiet favors. I sat in the stifling heat of my truck cab and watched the front doors. 15 minutes later, Julian walked out. He was buttoning his custom suit jacket, staring down at his phone and smiling a greasy, victorious smile. He looked like a man who had just bought a guaranteed victory. He climbed into his leased sports car and sped away down the tree-lined avenue. He had no idea I was sitting less than 50 feet away watching his entire pathetic performance unfold. I waited until his car turned the corner. Then I stepped out of my truck and walked across the street. I kept my posture completely straight. There was no need to play the fragile, shuffling old man right now. The time for acting was over. I pushed through the sleek glass doors of the clinic. The waiting room smelled of expensive lavender oil and sanitized lies. A young receptionist sitting behind a marble desk looked up. Her eyes narrowed immediately as she took in my heavy work boots, my faded jeans, and my red flannel shirt. She opened her mouth to ask if I was a lost delivery driver, but I did not give her the chance to speak. I completely ignored her. I walked straight past her desk, marched down the quiet carpeted hallway, and pushed open the heavy mahogany door at the very end. The man sitting behind the massive oak desk was Dr. Preston. He wore a tailored suit underneath a pristine white medical coat. He was typing on a silver laptop, but he looked up startled and deeply annoyed by the sudden intrusion. He adjusted his expensive designer glasses and glared at me with absolute arrogance. "Excuse me," Dr. Preston snapped, his voice dripping with elitist entitlement. "You cannot just walk in here. The waiting room is out front and I am entirely booked for the rest of the day. You need to leave my office right now." I closed the heavy mahogany door behind me and pushed the brass lock until it clicked shut. The sound echoed sharply in the quiet room. "I am not here for a therapy session, doctor," I said, keeping my voice dangerously low and calm. "My name is Cornelius. You just had a very profitable meeting with my son Julian." Dr. Preston's face twitched. He blinked rapidly, clearly caught off guard, but he immediately tried to construct a wall of professional outrage. "I have absolutely no idea who you are talking about," he said smoothly. "Patient confidentiality is strictly enforced in this clinic. I must ask you to leave my property right now before I call building security and have you physically removed." I did not move a single inch. I reached inside the front pocket of my flannel shirt and pulled out a thick folded envelope. I walked slowly across the plush carpet, stopped right in front of his desk, and dropped the envelope onto his leather blotter. "Call security," I told him, looking dead into his eyes. "Call the police while you are at it. It will save me a trip to the precinct." The doctor hesitated. His hand hovered over his desk phone, but his eyes darted down to the envelope. "Open it," I commanded. His hands began to shake slightly as he reached out and pulled the documents from the envelope. The first page was a high-resolution photograph taken by my investigator just an hour ago. It showed Julian walking into this exact clinic carrying a thick briefcase. The second page was a freshly printed banking ledger intercepted by my forensic accountant. It showed a highly illegal wire transfer of exactly $20,000. The money had moved from a shell account linked to Julian's bankrupt company straight into a private offshore account registered directly to Dr. Preston. The transfer had successfully cleared just 15 minutes ago. Dr. Preston went completely pale. All the arrogant color drained out of his face in a single second. He looked like a man who had just stepped on a live landmine. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. "You took $20,000 from a desperate, bankrupt man to write a fabricated medical report," I said, leaning over his desk, letting the sheer weight of my presence consume the room. "You agreed to testify under oath in a family court that I suffer from severe Alzheimer's and violent tendencies, even though you have never spoken a single word to me in your entire life. You traded your medical license and your freedom for a quick payday. That is not what happened." The doctor stammered, his voice cracking, his confident posture collapsing entirely. "You do not understand. Julian told me it was an emergency." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted, pointing a calloused finger at the third document in the pile. "Look at the next page, doctor." He flipped the paper over with trembling fingers. It was a formal, heavily detailed legal complaint addressed directly to the state medical board and the federal authorities. It outlined his exact role in a coordinated conspiracy to commit medical fraud, elder abuse, and perjury. At the bottom of the page, my signature was already inked thick and bold. Right next to it was the official red seal of a federal notary. "My legal team is standing by, ready to file this federal complaint the second I walk out of this room," I told him, my voice as hard as concrete. "By tomorrow morning, your medical license will be permanently revoked. Your lucrative clinic will be raided by federal agents. Your offshore accounts will be frozen, and you will be facing a minimum of 10 years in a federal penitentiary for criminal conspiracy against a senior citizen." Dr. Preston collapsed back into his expensive leather chair. He was breathing heavily, panic sweating from his pores. He looked at my face, finally realizing the massive, fatal mistake he had made. Julian had clearly pitched a story about a weak, easily manipulated, senile old fool. Now this corrupt doctor was staring at a titan who could dismantle his entire existence with one phone call. "Please," the doctor whispered. He actually slid out of his chair and dropped to his knees on the plush carpet. He looked up at me, begging like a trapped animal. "Please, I have a family. I have massive medical school loans. I was desperate. Julian told me it was just a simple favor. He said you were a danger to your grandson. I did not know who you really were. I swear to you, I will cancel the report. I will wire the money back right now. Please do not destroy my life." I looked down at the pathetic man crying on his knees. "I do not care about your family, and I do not care about your financial loans," I said coldly. "But I will give you exactly one chance to stay out of a prison cell. You are going to give me every single piece of communication you have regarding this fraud, right now." The doctor scrambled to his feet. He lunged toward his computer, his hands flying across the keyboard in a desperate frenzy. "Yes, whatever you want, I have it all saved," he babbled, his voice high and panicked. He pulled open a hidden password-protected folder on his desktop and hit print. The heavy laser printer in the corner hummed to life, spitting out page after page. He gathered the warm papers and handed them to me, refusing to meet my eyes. It was not just Julian, the doctor confessed, his voice trembling with fear. It was his wife. She is the one who orchestrated the specific medical details. She set up the whole narrative. I took the papers and looked down at the printed emails. They were sent directly from Chloe's personal email account to the doctor. I read her vicious, calculating words. Chloe had not just agreed to the plan. She had provided the doctor with a highly detailed, bulleted list of step-by-step instructions on exactly how to fabricate my delusional symptoms. She told him exactly what lies to write about me, threatening little Leo. She even provided the specific legal phrasing he needed to use in his medical evaluation to ensure the judge would strip away my human rights without question. Chloe was not just a greedy accomplice. She was the cold-blooded architect of my destruction. I left that pathetic, trembling doctor in his expensive clinic and walked back out into the blistering Atlanta heat. The thick folder of printed emails from my daughter-in-law felt like a block of lead in my hands. It was undeniable written proof of her absolute lack of a human soul. I climbed into my rusty Ford truck and gripped the worn leather steering wheel. I was tired. I was furious. But more than anything, I felt a deep, overwhelming sadness. In the middle of all this toxic greed, all this legal warfare and financial maneuvering, there was an innocent 6-year-old boy caught in the crossfire. I needed to see my grandson. I needed to see Leo. I needed to look into his bright eyes and remind myself what I was actually fighting to protect. The family court judge had not yet ruled on Julian's ridiculous emergency petition for conservatorship. That meant my civil rights were still fully intact. I was still a free man, and I still had my authorized access to pick up my grandson from his elite private academy in the suburbs. I pulled up to the school gates just as the final bell rang. The parking lot was a sea of luxury SUVs and imported electric cars driven by wealthy parents and private nannies. I parked my old truck at the end of the line and walked toward the designated pickup area. I stood tall, ignoring the side eyes and judgmental whispers from the high society mothers who clutched their designer bags a little tighter as I walked past. I kept my eyes focused on the heavy double doors of the school building. When the doors opened, a flood of children in neat uniforms poured out. It only took a few seconds for me to spot him. Leo was holding his little backpack looking around the crowd. When his eyes finally found me, his entire face lit up like a beacon. He dropped his heavy backpack right on the concrete and started running toward me as fast as his little legs could carry him. "Grandpa!" he yelled, his voice cutting through the noise of the crowded courtyard. I knelt down, opening my arms wide, bracing myself for the impact. He crashed into my chest, throwing his arms tightly around my neck. I closed my eyes and buried my face in his shoulder, breathing in the scent of crayons and playground dirt. For just one brief second, all the betrayal and the darkness of the past 2 days completely vanished. Holding him, I felt the pure, unbreakable bond of family that my son and his wife had so casually thrown away. But that moment of pure peace was violently shattered. The screeching sound of heavy tires burning rubber against the asphalt echoed across the school parking lot. A massive, blacked-out luxury SUV aggressively cut off the line of waiting cars, jumping the curb and slamming on the brakes right in front of the main gate. The heavy doors flew open. Chloe stepped out. She was wearing massive dark sunglasses and a sharp designer trench coat, looking frantic and furious. But she did not come alone. Stepping out of the vehicle right behind her were 2 massive, broad-shouldered men wearing cheap tactical suits and earpieces. Bodyguards. She had actually hired private muscle to come to an elementary school. "Get away from my son!" Chloe screamed at the top of her lungs. Her voice was shrill and hysterical, deliberately loud enough for every single parent, teacher, and child in the courtyard to hear. She was putting on a theatrical performance for the wealthy crowd, aggressively building her false narrative that I was a dangerous, unhinged old man. The 2 massive bodyguards immediately stepped forward, closing the distance between us with heavy, threatening steps. They cracked their knuckles, clearly expecting an old, frail grandfather to cower in fear and step back. They had no idea they were walking up on a man who had spent 40 years surviving on the most dangerous construction sites in Chicago and Atlanta. I had dealt with corrupt union bosses, ruthless mobsters, and street thugs. 2 rented muscles in tight suits did not scare me in the slightest. I did not flinch. I did not take a single step back. I slowly stood up to my full height, keeping Leo positioned safely behind my legs. I stared dead into the eyes of the lead bodyguard. His aggressive stride faltered for a fraction of a second when he saw my face. He expected to see a frightened, confused elderly man. Instead, he saw a stone wall. He saw a man who would gladly snap his jaw if he took one more step toward my grandson. "Do not even think about putting your hands on me," I warned them, my voice rumbling deep in my chest, low and steady. "I have a legal right to be here. If you touch me, I promise you will not walk back to that car." The bodyguard stopped exchanging an uncertain glance, but Chloe was not done. She pushed past them, her face twisted in a mask of ugly manufactured panic. "He is delusional," Chloe yelled to the terrified parents gathered around us. "Call school security. He is not in his right mind. He is suffering from advanced dementia, and he is having a violent episode. He is trying to kidnap my child." The crowd gasped. Several mothers pulled their children back, shielding them from me. "Grandpa, run away." Leo sobbed, his tiny voice cracking with absolute terror. "You have to run. Mommy said you are going to be locked in a mental hospital forever. She told Daddy they are going to take all your money to buy supercars. She said you are never coming back." My breath caught in my throat. The world around me seemed to stop spinning. The yelling of the parents, the heavy footsteps of the guards, the blasting heat of the sun. It all faded into a dead, echoing silence. They had not just plotted my destruction behind closed doors. They had not just stolen my money and forged medical documents. They had actively discussed locking me away in a psychiatric ward right in front of a 6-year-old child. They had poisoned the mind of an innocent boy with their toxic, filthy greed. They had stripped away his childhood just to gloat about their stolen wealth. It was a level of moral bankruptcy that I could not even comprehend. Before I could say another word to comfort him, Chloe lunged forward. She violently grabbed Leo by his small arm, ripping him away from my chest with such force that the boy cried out in pain. She dragged him behind her, shielding him with her body as if I were a rabid dog. With her free hand, she reached into her designer coat and pulled out a folded legal document. She stepped aggressively into my space and shoved the heavy paper directly into the center of my chest. "Read it and weep, old man," she hissed, her voice dropping all the theatrical panic. "A judge signed it an hour ago based on Dr. Preston's medical evaluation. It is an emergency temporary restraining order. You are legally forbidden from coming within 500 feet of me, my husband, or my son." She smiled a wicked, triumphant smile. She thought she had won. She thought the forged medical documents had secured her victory before the trial even began. "If you take one step closer to my family, you will be arrested and thrown in a padded cell," Chloe sneered. "Goodbye, Cornelius. Enjoy the nursing home." She turned on her heel and dragged my sobbing grandson toward the black SUV. Leo looked back at me over his shoulder, reaching his little hand out, crying for his grandfather. The bodyguards quickly flanked them, opening the heavy doors. Chloe threw the boy into the back seat and climbed in after him. The heavy luxury doors slammed shut with a sickening thud, severing the last physical tie I had to my family. The SUV engine roared to life. The tires squealed as the vehicle sped out of the school parking lot, disappearing down the tree-lined avenue, taking my only grandson away from me. I stood completely alone in the center of the courtyard. The school security guards were watching me cautiously from a distance. The wealthy parents were whispering and pointing, but I did not feel any embarrassment. I did not feel any shame. As I looked down at the temporary restraining order in my hand, the deep, overwhelming sadness that had weighed me down all morning was gone. It was replaced by something else, something terrifying and absolute. Chloe and Julian thought they had just played their winning card. They thought this piece of paper was a shield that would protect them. They did not realize that by traumatizing that little boy, they had just crossed the final unforgivable line. I slowly folded the restraining order and slipped it into my pocket. The time for gathering evidence was officially over. It was time to pull the trigger. It was time to freeze the world they lived in, burn their false empire to the ground, and watch them choke on the ashes. I watched the massive black luxury vehicle disappear down the tree-lined avenue, taking my only grandson away from me. I stood alone in the school courtyard with the emergency restraining order heavy in my pocket. The searing pain in my chest was not a heart attack. It was the final agonizing death of my fatherly love. Julian and Chloe had crossed a boundary that could never be uncrossed. They had taken an innocent child and poisoned his mind with their toxic greed. They had weaponized my own flesh and blood against me. I turned around and walked slowly back to my rusty truck. I did not shed another tear. Tears are for people who have no other options. I had spent my entire life building a commercial real estate empire out of raw concrete and steel. I knew exactly how to construct a towering skyscraper, which meant I also knew exactly where to place the dynamite to bring a structure completely down. Julian and Chloe thought their foundation was rock solid. They forgot that I was the one who poured the concrete. I climbed into the sweltering cab of my truck and drove straight away from the suburbs. I did not go back to my quiet old house. I drove directly to the Pinnacle Tower in the heart of downtown Atlanta. I rode the private executive elevator up to the 60th floor. My lead attorney, Aisha, and my chief forensic accountant, Victor, were already waiting for me in the main conference room. I walked in through the crumpled restraining order onto the polished mahogany table and sat down heavily in the leather chair at the head of the room. I looked at Aisha and told her that the time for patience and observation was officially over. I ordered her to execute the final phase of our defensive strategy immediately. I instructed Aisha to transfer the master holding company into a blind, irrevocable trust. Let me explain the terrifying power of what that means. A standard revocable trust can be altered or dissolved. If Julian somehow managed to bribe his corrupt doctor and actually convinced a family court judge to grant him a medical conservatorship over me, he could potentially break a revocable trust and steal all the assets inside it. But an irrevocable trust is a legal fortress made of titanium. Once my signature hit that paper, the assets belonged entirely to the trust itself. Not even I could take them back. And most importantly, nobody could ever claim them through a conservatorship. That master holding company owned the deed to the multi-million-dollar mansion Julian and Chloe currently lived in. It owned the leasing contracts for their high-end imported sports cars. It controlled the credit lines they used for their lavish vacations and designer clothes. By moving that holding company into the irrevocable trust, I was legally erasing their entire lifestyle from existence. I signed the heavy stack of documents Aisha placed in front of me. With a few strokes of a pen, I turned their wealthy reality into absolute vapor. Then I turned my attention to Victor. I asked him if the digital dossier was prepared. Victor nodded and slid a thick black binder across the table. It contained every single piece of evidence we had gathered. It held the forged signatures from the $2 million commercial loan application. It held the banking traces showing Julian paying the corrupt doctor $20,000 for fake medical records. It held the cooked financial ledgers of Julian's failing tech startup showing massive payroll fraud and embezzlement. I told Victor to launch the strike. I ordered him to send anonymous digital data drops directly to the Enforcement Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission. I also ordered him to send a duplicate file to the chief risk officer of the private equity bank Julian was actively trying to defraud. Victor typed rapidly on his keyboard and hit the enter key. The files were sent out into the world. The financial guillotine was officially released, and it was falling fast. I knew exactly where Julian and Chloe were spending their evening. Chloe was hosting a massive charity fundraising gala at an exclusive downtown art museum. She loved to play the generous philanthropist using money she had stolen from me. She had spent the last 2 months planning this elite event just to secure her elevated status among the wealthy high society circles of Atlanta. She undoubtedly felt completely untouchable tonight. She had her temporary restraining order secured in her designer purse. She thought she had effectively locked her senile old father-in-law in a legal cage. She thought she had already won the war. I did not go into the museum. I sat in the back of a tinted black luxury sedan parked directly across the street from the glowing entrance. Resting on my lap was a highly secure tablet streaming a live video and audio feed. One of my private investigators had infiltrated the gala wearing a tailored tuxedo and a hidden lapel camera. I sat in the cool darkness of the car and watched the screen with cold, calculated satisfaction. The museum ballroom was breathtaking. It was filled with hundreds of wealthy political donors, corporate executives, and local celebrities. Chloe was standing near the grand marble staircase wearing a shimmering diamond necklace and a custom silk gown that she had purchased using a credit card fraudulently opened in my name. Julian stood next to her holding a crystal glass of expensive champagne. He looked incredibly smug. He looked like a man who believed he had outsmarted everyone in the room. The investigator moved closer as Chloe took the microphone to address the massive crowd. Her voice echoed softly through the grand hall. She gave a beautifully rehearsed and completely fake tearful speech about the importance of giving back to the community and helping those less fortunate. The sheer hypocrisy of her words was absolutely staggering. She was a woman who had just terrorized her own son and threatened to throw an innocent old man into an asylum, yet here she was preaching about kindness. Then came her grand finale. She announced to the entire silent room that she and her successful husband were personally pledging $50,000 to the charity fund that very night. The crowd erupted into thunderous applause. Chloe smiled a brilliant camera-ready smile and walked gracefully down the stairs toward the donation terminal where the charity directors were waiting with a wireless credit card machine. I leaned much closer to my tablet screen. This was the exact second the banking algorithms caught up with reality. Chloe pulled a sleek, heavy black corporate card from her purse. It was a card tied directly to my master holding company, the very company that was now locked tightly inside the irrevocable trust and permanently frozen by my legal team just hours ago. She handed the card to the charity director with a dramatic flourish for the local photographers. The director smiled graciously and swiped the heavy metal card through the electronic machine. The machine beeped with a harsh, loud, negative tone. A bright red error message flashed across the small digital screen. The director smiled apologetically and told Chloe there must be a simple connection error. He swiped the card a second time. The machine beeped again. Declined. The applause in the grand ballroom began to die down rapidly. An awkward, heavy silence fell over the wealthy crowd. People standing nearby started to whisper behind their hands. Chloe let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh and told the director to try it one more time, insisting loudly that the card had absolutely unlimited funds. The director swiped it for a third time. The machine beeped a long, continuous tone and flashed a severe warning message instructing the merchant to confiscate the card immediately due to suspected financial fraud. At that exact same second, absolute chaos struck Julian on the other side of the room. Through the hidden video feed, I watched Julian's phone light up in his hand. He glanced casually at the screen, and his arrogant smile vanished in an instant. All the color drained completely out of his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. Then his phone began to vibrate violently. Before he could process the first notification, another call came in, and then another. His phone was buzzing so relentlessly, he almost dropped his crystal champagne glass on the marble floor. I knew exactly what was happening on his screen. The Securities and Exchange Commission had just raided the downtown offices of his tech startup. Federal agents were actively carrying out boxes of hard drives and financial ledgers. His board of directors had just been notified of the massive federal fraud allegations. His primary investors, the billionaires he desperately relied on to fund his fake lifestyle, were simultaneously executing emergency clauses to pull all their capital out of his sinking ship. Chloe was arguing loudly and aggressively with the charity director now. Her face was turning bright red with absolute humiliation as the entire room of wealthy elites stared at her declining card. Julian aggressively grabbed his own hair, staring down at his phone in total, unadulterated terror, as notifications of frozen bank accounts, collapsed investments, and emergency board meetings flooded his screen one after another. The financial purge I had promised had finally arrived, and it was tearing their fake empire completely to the ground. The grandfather clock in my hallway struck midnight. The deep, heavy chimes echoed through the dark, empty house. I was sitting in my favorite leather armchair in the corner of the living room, hidden completely in the shadows. The only light came from the pale moonlight filtering through the front windows. In my right hand, I held a heavy crystal glass filled with a generous pour of aged bourbon. I did not drink it. I just swirled the amber liquid slowly, listening to the ice clink softly against the glass. I was wide awake. I knew exactly what was coming. When you dismantle a man's entire world, you do not go to sleep. You wait for the fallout. And the fallout arrived exactly at 12:15. The roaring engine of a high-performance sports car shattered the quiet peace of my suburban street. I heard the screech of expensive tires skidding violently onto my driveway, launching loose gravel against the side of my house. A car door slammed shut with aggressive force. Then came the heavy, uncoordinated footsteps stomping up my wooden porch. He did not ring the doorbell. He did not knock politely. He pounded his fists against the thick oak wood like a madman trying to escape a burning building. "Dad, open this door right now." It was Julian. His voice was raw, hoarse, and dripping with panic. He pounded on the wood again, rattling the glass panes. When I did not answer, the pounding stopped for a brief second. Then a massive, violent impact shook the entire front of the house. He kicked the door with all his might. The old brass lock splintered through the wooden frame with a loud crack, and the door flew wide open, slamming against the interior wall. Julian stumbled into the hallway, breathing heavily, bringing the sharp, bitter stench of cheap liquor and cold sweat into my home. The man standing in my foyer looked nothing like the arrogant, custom-suited executive who had slapped me across the face at a country club just days before. He was a complete wreck, His expensive jacket was missing. His silk tie was ripped open and hanging loosely around his neck. His shirt was unbuttoned, wrinkled, and stained. His eyes were bloodshot and wide with a feral, unhinged terror. "Dad, where are you?" he screamed into the dark house, his voice cracking. "Answer me!" I sat perfectly still in the shadows of the living room, letting him panic. He stumbled forward, kicking a small side table out of his way, sending a vase crashing to the hardwood floor. "What did you do?" Julian roared, grabbing his own hair in desperation. "What did you do to the accounts? Everything is frozen. My corporate cards are declining. My personal accounts are locked. The bank told me a master holding company placed a federal freeze on every single asset I have. Chloe is screaming at me. The investors are threatening to kill me. What did you touch? What did you say to the bank?" I slowly took a sip of my bourbon. The smooth burn grounded me. Then I spoke, keeping my voice low, reedy, and incredibly frail. "Julian, is that you?" I asked, letting my hand shake just enough to make the ice in my glass rattle. "Why did you break my door, son? You scared me." Julian whipped his head toward the dark corner of the room. He marched aggressively toward me, stopping just a few feet away, looming over my chair like a predator. But he was not a predator. He was a drowning rat looking for a piece of driftwood. "Stop playing the victim!" Julian spat, his chest heaving. "Fix this right now. I know you went to the bank today. Did you mess up the paperwork? Did you report the wrong account number? Call them. Call whoever handles your miserable little pension and tell them they made a mistake. The SEC raided my office today. My whole company is gone. I am losing my house, my cars, everything. You have to call them and unfreeze my money." I looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes. I channeled every ounce of the naive, helpless old father he believed I was. I shrank back into my leather chair, clutching my glass with both hands as if I were terrified of his anger. "I do not know what you are talking about, Julian," I whispered, my voice trembling perfectly. "I do not have a master holding company. I just have my little checking account. You know that. But I did get a very scary phone call today. It made me so confused and frightened." Julian groaned in frustration, pacing back and forth in front of me like a caged animal. "What phone call? What are you talking about?" "A man from a private equity firm called me this morning," I said slowly, carefully measuring every single word. "He said somebody applied for a massive commercial loan. He said it was for $2 million. Julian, they said the application had my social security number on it. They said my house was put up as collateral. They even had a notary stamp with my signature." Julian's pacing stopped instantly. He froze in the middle of my living room as if he had just been struck by lightning. The drunken rage evaporated from his face, replaced by a sudden paralyzing horror. The color drained from his cheeks. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing without any sound coming out. I let a single tear roll down my cheek, playing the devastated, betrayed grandfather to absolute perfection. "I was so terrified, Julian." I continued, my voice cracking with fake emotion. "I thought identity thieves were trying to steal the house your mother and I built. I did not know what to do. So I did the only thing I could think of. I went straight to the police precinct. I sat down with a federal investigator. I filed a full police report for identity theft and massive financial fraud." Julian's knees actually buckled. He stumbled backward, hitting the wall and sliding down until he was sitting on the floor. He looked at me with eyes so full of sheer terror that they were practically bulging out of his skull. "You went to the police," Julian whispered, his voice trembling so violently he could barely form the words. "You filed a federal fraud report." I nodded, maintaining my fragile, innocent expression. "Yes, son." The investigator was very helpful. He said forging a signature for a $2 million bank loan is a severe federal felony. He said whoever did this is going to federal prison for a very long time. They already have the documents. They are tracing the notary right now. They asked me if I knew anyone who would want to steal from me, but I told them my son would never let anyone hurt me. Julian began to hyperventilate. He was clutching his chest, gasping for air. The reality of his situation was finally crashing down on him with the weight of a freight train. He was already facing SEC violations for his bankrupt company. But forging his father's signature and stealing an identity for a multi-million-dollar bank loan was a guaranteed, undeniable prison sentence. There was no clever lawyer who could save him from a forged notary stamp. The walls were closing in, and he knew he had absolutely nowhere to run. "Julian," I asked softly, leaning forward, "do you know who would do such a terrible thing to your old father?" He looked up at me. His arrogant pride was completely shattered. The man who had slapped me in front of a crowd of billionaires was now sitting in the dirt of my living room completely broken. He began to sob. Ugly, wet, pathetic tears streamed down his face. He crawled across the hardwood floor on his hands and knees, closing the distance between us until he was directly at my feet. He grabbed my knees, burying his face in my old denim jeans, weeping uncontrollably. "It was me," Julian screamed, his voice echoing in the quiet house filled with absolute desperation. "It was me, Dad. I did it. I forged your signature. I paid the notary to stamp the papers. I was desperate. The company was failing. Chloe was spending too much. I was going to lose everything. I just needed the $2 million to stay afloat. I did not mean to hurt you." I looked down at the top of his head. I did not move. I did not reach out to comfort him. I just sat there in the dark holding my glass of bourbon. "Dad, please," Julian begged, looking up at me with a face soaked in tears and snot. "You have to save me. You have to call the police right now. Tell them you were confused. Tell them you actually authorized the loan. Tell them you signed it yourself and forgot because of your memory. If you do not lie for me, they are going to arrest me. I will go to federal prison. They will take me away from Leo. Please, Dad, I am your son." I stared down into his terrified, pleading eyes. He was begging me to play the senile old fool one more time just to save his miserable life. He was begging me to protect him after he had tried to strip away my human rights and lock me in an asylum. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my bourbon. The ice clinked softly in the quiet room. "I am sorry, Julian," I whispered, my voice completely devoid of any emotion, cold and empty. "But you said it yourself just yesterday. I am losing my mind. My memory is completely gone. I do not think the police will believe a word I say." Julian let out a gut-wrenching wail of pure despair. He collapsed onto the floor, curling into a fetal position, sobbing into the hardwood. He was completely defeated. He had confessed to everything. He had admitted to the forgery, the bribery, and the fraud, screaming it at the top of his lungs in a desperate plea for mercy. He did not know that sitting quietly on the top shelf of the bookcase directly behind him, perfectly angled to capture his face and his voice, was a high-definition micro camera. My private investigator had installed it 3 days ago. A tiny, invisible red light blinked in the darkness. It recorded every single second of his miserable, undeniable confession. The trap had not just snapped shut, it had crushed him completely. The morning after my son crawled on my hardwood floor and confessed to federal fraud, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was just past 7. The message was short, sharp, and completely devoid of emotion. It read, "Julian is sinking. We need to talk. Just you and me. Meet me at the Artisan Cafe on 10th Street in 1 hour. Come alone." It was Chloe. I was not surprised in the slightest. When a ship hits an iceberg and starts taking on water, the rats are always the first ones to jump overboard. Julian was a drowning man, and his loving wife was already looking for a life raft. I put on my usual faded denim jeans, laced up my heavy work boots, and threw on a simple gray jacket. I drove my rusty Ford into the upscale shopping district parked down the block and walked into the trendy cafe. It smelled of roasted espresso beans and expensive privilege. I spotted her immediately. Chloe was sitting in a secluded booth all the way in the back, far away from the large glass windows. She was wearing an oversized designer trench coat, a silk scarf wrapped tightly around her neck, and massive dark sunglasses that covered half of her face. She was desperately trying to look invisible, but her nervous, erratic movements gave her away. She was tapping her manicured fingernails aggressively against the marble table, her jaw clenched tight. She looked like a mercenary who had just realized she was fighting for the losing side. I walked over and slid into the booth across from her. I did not order a coffee. I just folded my rough, calloused hands on the table and waited. I wanted her to speak first. I wanted to see exactly how deep the rot in her soul truly went. Chloe took off her sunglasses and looked at me. Her eyes were bloodshot, but there were no tears. She was not grieving the sudden collapse of her luxurious lifestyle. She was calculating. "Julian is ruined," Chloe said, cutting straight to the chase, her voice a low, venomous whisper. "The Securities and Exchange Commission agents raided his corporate office yesterday. All of his investors pulled out overnight. The bank called me this morning screaming about frozen accounts and a rejected $50,000 charity donation. I do not know how you managed to trigger a federal financial freeze, old man, but I know a sinking ship when I see one. My husband is going to federal prison, and I refuse to go down with him. I kept my face perfectly blank. I did not give her the satisfaction of a smile. And what does any of this have to do with me, Chloe? She leaned forward across the table, lowering her voice even further, her eyes darting around the cafe to make sure no one was listening. It has everything to do with you, Cornelius. Tomorrow morning is the emergency family court hearing. Julian is going to stand before a judge and present Dr. Preston's medical evaluation. He is going to swear under oath that you are a violent, aggressive, senile old man who needs to be locked away in a psychiatric facility. And as his wife, I am supposed to take the witness stand and corroborate every single one of his lies. She paused, taking a slow sip of her overpriced latte, letting the threat hang in the air. But I can make all your legal problems disappear, she said smoothly. I am willing to offer you a mutually beneficial business arrangement. I tilted my head slightly. I am listening. Chloe leaned even closer, her eyes gleaming with absolute unadulterated greed. I want $500,000 in untraceable cash, she demanded, her tone completely clinical. And I want you to sign the deed of the luxury mansion over to me free and clear of any trusts or holding companies. I stared at her, letting the silence stretch out. You want $500,000 and a multi-million-dollar piece of real estate, I replied quietly. And what exactly do I get in return for this generous payout? You get your life back, Chloe said, a wicked, triumphant smirk playing on her lips. Give me what I want, and tomorrow at the hearing I will turn on Julian. I will take the witness stand and completely destroy him. I will tell the judge that the conservatorship was entirely his idea. I will testify that he forged the medical documents, that he bribed the doctor, and that he acted completely alone. I will hand him to the federal prosecutors on a silver platter. She took a deep breath, preparing to deliver her ultimate bargaining chip. But that is not all, Cornelius. I know what you really care about. If you pay me the money and give me the house, I will completely surrender all my parental rights. I will give you full, uncontested legal custody of Leo. You get your grandson back permanently. I will walk away, and you will never see me again. I stopped breathing for a fraction of a second. I sat frozen in the booth, staring at the woman sitting across from me. I had dealt with ruthless corporate sharks, corrupt city officials, and greedy land developers for over 40 years. But I had never in my entire life witnessed a level of pure sociopathic evil quite like this. She was casually selling her husband of 7 years to a federal penitentiary to save her own skin. But far worse than that, she was putting a literal price tag on her own 6-year-old child. She was willing to abandon the son she had carried in her womb, trade him like a piece of depreciating real estate just so she could walk away with a pile of cash and a free mansion. It was absolutely demonic. You would really sell your own son, I whispered, my voice thick with a mixture of disgust and sorrow. You would just hand Leo over for a payout. Chloe rolled her eyes and waved her manicured hand dismissively, clearly annoyed by my moral judgment. Oh, spare me the emotional lecture, Cornelius. Leo loves you more than he loves me anyway. He will be perfectly fine living in your old rusty house. I am young, I am beautiful, and I need a fresh start. Julian dragged me into this mess, and I am cutting my losses. So do we have a deal, or do I destroy you in court tomorrow? I looked at her cold, dead eyes. I reached inside the inner pocket of my jacket. I did not pull out a checkbook. I did not pull out a contract. I pulled out a thick manila envelope and slid it across the marble table until it bumped against her coffee cup. That is a very tempting offer, Chloe, I said smoothly, keeping my voice as calm as a frozen lake. But unfortunately, I have to decline. You see, I brought a counteroffer. Open it. Chloe frowned, her arrogant smirk faltering slightly. She picked up the envelope, tore open the top flap, and pulled out the stack of glossy 8x10 photographs hidden inside. The moment her eyes focused on the first picture, the color drained completely out of her face. Her jaw dropped open. She quickly flipped to the second photo, then the third, her hands beginning to shake violently. The high-definition photographs were taken by my private investigator over the past 4 months. They showed Chloe in various states of undress with a deeply tanned, heavily muscled man, her personal fitness trainer. There were photos of them kissing passionately in the parking lot of an exclusive gym. There were photos of them walking hand in hand into high-end boutique hotels in the middle of the afternoon. But the photographs were not the lethal blow. The lethal blow was the spreadsheet stapled to the very back of the stack. My forensic accountant is a very thorough man, Chloe, I whispered, leaning over the table, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. He tracked every single dollar you spent on your romantic little afternoon getaways. You paid for those luxury hotel suites and those expensive dinners using the credit cards you fraudulently opened using my social security number. You financed your secret affair using money stolen directly from an elderly man. Chloe could not breathe. She was gasping for air, staring in absolute horror at the financial ledgers that perfectly matched the dates of her hotel rendezvous. You are not a star witness for the prosecution, Chloe. I continued, driving the final nail into her coffin. You are a criminal co-conspirator. You committed felony identity theft, wire fraud, and elder financial abuse. When I hand this envelope to the federal agents investigating your husband, they are going to arrest you right alongside him. You are going to share a cell block with the man you just tried to sell out, Chloe snapped. The wealthy, composed, high society mask completely shattered into a million jagged pieces. She slammed both her fists onto the marble table with terrifying force, knocking over her expensive latte. Hot coffee spilled everywhere, dripping off the edge of the table and onto her designer shoes, but she did not even notice. You arrogant, pathetic old fool, Chloe hissed, her face contorting into an ugly mask of pure, primal rage. Her voice was shaking with venom. You think a few pictures scare me? I am a mother. Do you hear me? I am a young, distressed mother, and family court judges always side with the mother. She stood up abruptly, grabbing her purse, her chest heaving with fury. Tomorrow is the conservatorship hearing, she spat, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. I am going to stand up in that courtroom. I am going to cry my eyes out, and I will swear under oath that you are a violent, deranged lunatic who tried to physically attack me. I will tell the judge you are a monster. I will destroy your life tomorrow morning, Cornelius. I will make sure you die, locked in a padded room, and I will take every single penny you own. She turned on her heel and stormed out of the cafe, practically kicking the glass door open in her blind rage. The other patrons in the coffee shop were staring in shocked silence. I did not move. I did not react to her screaming. I simply signaled, the barista paid for her spilled coffee, and walked back out to my truck. Chloe thought she was going to a standard family court hearing tomorrow. She had no idea she was walking straight into a legal slaughterhouse. The heavy oak doors of the county civil courthouse closed behind me with a loud thud that echoed through the marble hallway. It was Monday morning. The air conditioning inside the courtroom was freezing, but the cold I felt had nothing to do with the temperature. It was the absolute freezing chill of watching your own flesh and blood walk into a room preparing to lie under oath to destroy your life. I walked down the center aisle and took my seat at the defense table. I wore a simple brown suit. It was clean and pressed, but deliberately modest. Sitting right next to me was Aisha. She looked like a lethal weapon wrapped in a tailored charcoal blazer. She was organizing her legal briefs with the calm precision of a sniper. A few moments later, Julian and Chloe walked through those same heavy oak doors. They had clearly spent the weekend rehearsing their roles. Julian was wearing a conservative dark suit, but his face was pale, and the dark circles under his eyes were impossible to hide. The crushing weight of his frozen bank accounts and his collapsing tech startup was eating him alive from the inside out. Chloe walked slightly behind him, playing the part of the exhausted, terrified mother to absolute perfection. She wore a simple beige dress, holding a tissue tightly in her hands. They were accompanied by a very expensive-looking lawyer named Mr. Vance, who carried a thick leather briefcase and walked with the arrogant swagger of a man who thought he was about to easily crush a helpless old victim. The bailiff announced the arrival of Judge Harrison. We all stood up as the older, stern-faced judge took his seat behind the high wooden bench. He adjusted his reading glasses and looked down at the paperwork in front of him. He sighed heavily, looking over at me with an expression of profound pity. It was the look you give to a dying dog. Julian and Chloe had done their jobs well. They had already poisoned the well before the trial even officially began. Judge Harrison banged his wooden gavel once and opened the floor to Julian's legal counsel. Mr. Vance stood up, buttoned his expensive suit jacket, and walked confidently to the center of the courtroom. He spoke with a smooth, theatrical voice designed to manipulate human emotion. Your Honor. Mr. Vance began looking at the judge with a deeply tragic expression. We are here today because of a heartbreaking family crisis. My client Julian is a devoted son who is desperately trying to save his father from the ravages of a terrible mental decline. The man sitting at the defense table, Cornelius, is unfortunately no longer the man he used to be. He is suffering from severe advanced dementia. His mind is gone, and tragically it has been replaced by confusion, paranoia, and sudden, terrifying bursts of physical violence. Mr. Vance paced back and forth, letting his words sink into the quiet courtroom. He turned and pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at me. He told the judge about the incident at the country club, but he did not tell the truth. He twisted reality so completely that it made my stomach churn. He claimed that I had crashed my grandson's private birthday party uninvited. He said I was raving and screaming nonsense at the wealthy guests. He told the judge that I aggressively lunged at little Leo, terrified the child, and forced Julian to step in to protect his own son. He completely fabricated a story where I threw the first punch, claiming Julian only raised his hand to block my aggressive attack. It was a masterful, sickening lie. I sat completely still at my table. I did not shake my head. I did not shout out in protest. Aisha had specifically instructed me to remain a perfect statue. She told me to let them build their beautiful house of cards as high as they possibly could. The taller the tower, the harder it shatters when the wind blows. Julian sat at his table, looking down at his hands, trying to look like a heartbroken son. But I could see the slight, subtle smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth. He thought he was winning. He thought his expensive lawyer was buying him the keys to my entire real estate empire. Then it was Chloe's turn to take the witness stand. She walked up to the wooden box with slow, hesitant steps. She swore on the Bible to tell the whole truth, knowing fully well she was about to unleash a flood of absolute perjury. The moment she sat down, she began to cry. It was not a fake, forced cry. She produced actual wet tears that rolled down her pale cheeks. She was an incredibly dangerous actress. Mr. Vance approached the stand and asked her to describe her recent interactions with me. Chloe choked back a sob and leaned into the microphone. Her voice trembled perfectly. She told the judge that she lived in constant, absolute terror. She described the incident at Leo's school just a few days ago. But just like her husband, she inverted the truth entirely. She claimed I had been stalking her family. She told the court that I ambushed her in the school parking lot, screaming crazy, delusional threats about locking her in a basement and stealing her child. She said my eyes were wild and empty, and that I did not even recognize who she was. She looked up at Judge Harrison with wide, pleading eyes. "Your Honor," Chloe cried, gripping the edges of the witness stand, "I love my father-in-law. We all love him so much. But he is a danger to himself and to my little boy. He wanders the streets in old dirty clothes. He talks to people who are not there. We are begging you to grant Julian full conservatorship so we can place Cornelius in a secure, specialized medical facility where he can get the 24-hour psychiatric care he desperately needs. Please save him before he hurts someone." She buried her face in her hands, sobbing loudly. The entire courtroom was completely silent except for the sound of her fake weeping. It was a flawless performance. She had painted me as a violent, unpredictable lunatic and painted herself as a loving, desperate mother trying to do the right thing. Judge Harrison let out another heavy, sorrowful sigh. He looked at the forged medical evaluation provided by the corrupt Dr. Preston, which sat at the very top of his evidence pile. The fake medical document corroborated every single lie Chloe and Julian had just told. To a judge who did not know any better, the case looked completely open and shut. An elderly man had lost his mind, and his loving family was stepping up to take over his estate. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked down at me from his high bench. "Mr. Cornelius," the judge said, his voice soft but incredibly firm, "aging is a cruel process that strips us of our faculties. Based on the sworn medical testimony of a licensed psychiatric professional and the deeply disturbing accounts of your own family members, I find that you are no longer capable of managing your own physical well-being or your financial estate." Julian let out a massive breath of relief. I saw his shoulders instantly relax. Chloe wiped her crocodile tears away and cast a quick, triumphant, victorious glance in my direction. They had done it. They thought they had successfully buried me alive. Judge Harrison reached out and picked up his heavy wooden gavel. He prepared to strike the sounding block and legally declare me mentally incompetent. He was 1 second away from handing my entire life over to the monsters sitting across the room, but the gavel never hit the wood. Aisha stood up. She did not raise her hand. She did not ask for permission. She stood up with such aggressive, sudden authority that the wooden chair scraped loudly against the marble floor, echoing like a gunshot through the silent courtroom. "Your Honor," Aisha said, her voice cutting through the heavy air like a razor blade. Judge Harrison froze his gavel, hovering in midair. He frowned deeply, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "Excuse me, counselor," the judge warned. "I am in the middle of issuing my final ruling. You did not even mount a defense during the primary testimonies." Aisha walked calmly around the defense table and stepped directly into the center of the room. She did not look at Julian. She did not look at Chloe. She kept her piercing gaze locked entirely on the judge. "We did not mount a defense, Your Honor, because we completely agree with one specific part of the petitioner's request," Aisha stated smoothly, projecting her voice so every single person in the gallery could hear her. "We agree that my client Cornelius should absolutely not be responsible for managing any financial assets belonging to his son Julian." The judge blinked in total confusion. Mr. Vance frowned, looking at Aisha as if she had suddenly lost her mind. Julian and Chloe exchanged a very fast, very nervous look. They did not understand what was happening. Why was my lawyer agreeing with them? "However, Your Honor," Aisha continued, her tone suddenly dropping into a cold, lethal register, "we agree for a very different reason. My client cannot manage Julian's financial estate because as of this morning, Julian has absolutely zero assets left to manage. His companies are bankrupt. His accounts are frozen by federal mandate. And more importantly, Your Honor, we strongly object to Julian acting as a legal conservator because as of 24 hours ago, he is the primary target of an active, ongoing criminal investigation by the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The word federal hung in the sterile courtroom air like a thick cloud of smoke. Judge Harrison slowly lowered his wooden gavel and stared at my lawyer with a look of absolute bewilderment. At the petitioner's table, Julian stopped breathing. His expensive lawyer, Mr. Vance, jumped to his feet so fast his chair tipped over and crashed onto the marble floor. He began shouting objections, demanding that Aisha be silenced, claiming her statements were outrageous and entirely irrelevant to a family court proceeding. But Aisha did not even blink. She stood her ground like a general on a battlefield and calmly asked the judge for permission to submit a series of newly acquired evidentiary exhibits. Judge Harrison ignored the frantic shouting of Julian's lawyer and nodded to Aisha, instructing her to proceed. Aisha walked over to the clerk's desk and handed over a small digital audio drive. She informed the court that under state law, I was perfectly within my rights to record a conversation in which I was an active participant. She asked the judge to listen to an interaction that took place inside a cheap diner just a few days ago. The clerk connected the drive to the courtroom audio system. The crackling sound of the diner filled the vast room, followed by the undeniable, crystal-clear voice of my daughter-in-law. The audio played Chloe hissing her venomous threats. "Sign it, old man, or you will never see Leo again. I will tell them you are violent. I will say you are losing your mind. I will get a permanent restraining order." Then Julian's voice echoed from the speakers, angrily demanding that I sign a massive stack of papers in front of a corrupt notary. The silence in the courtroom was suffocating. Every single person in the gallery was staring at Chloe. The elegant, devoted mother she had pretended to be just 5 minutes ago completely vanished. She shrank down into her chair, pulling her arms tightly around herself as if trying to physically disappear. Mr. Vance stared at his own clients with his mouth slightly open, realizing for the first time that he had been hired by absolute monsters. But Aisha was just getting started. She approached the bench and handed a thick bound folder directly to Judge Harrison. She told him to open the first tab. She explained that the medical evaluation sitting on his desk, the very document he almost used to strip away my human rights, was a purchased fabrication. Aisha read aloud the banking traces that proved Julian wired $20,000 to Dr. Preston just 1 hour before the fake diagnosis was signed. Then she read the printed emails from Chloe's personal account. Her sharp voice filled the room as she recited Chloe's exact instructions to the doctor, detailing exactly how to invent my symptoms of dementia and violent paranoia. Judge Harrison's face began to change. The soft, compassionate expression he had worn all morning melted away. His jaw tightened and his cheeks turned a deep, furious red. "A judge despises nothing more than someone attempting to use his courtroom as a weapon to commit a crime." He glared down at Julian and Chloe with a look of pure, righteous disgust. Mr. Vance tried to speak. He stammered, trying to formulate a defense, claiming the emails could have been hacked or the wire transfer misunderstood. But his voice lacked any real conviction. He was a smart lawyer, and he knew a sinking ship when he was standing on one. Aisha did not give them a single second to breathe. She signaled her assistant, who brought out a laptop and connected it to the large monitor facing the judge's bench. She told the court that they had heard my family threaten me, but now they needed to see the truth behind their motivations. She played the hidden camera footage from my living room. The screen lit up, showing the dark interior of my house at midnight. The video showed Julian kicking my front door open, stumbling into the room smelling of alcohol and sheer panic. The courtroom watched in absolute silence as my arrogant son, the man who had just sworn under oath that I was a danger to society, dropped to his knees on my hardwood floor. The audio was flawless. Julian's desperate, sobbing voice echoed off the courtroom walls. "It was me, Dad. I did it. I forged your signature. I paid the notary to stamp the papers. I was desperate. The company was failing. I was going to lose everything. I just needed the $2 million to stay afloat." I watched Julian as his midnight confession played for the entire court to see. He had his hands pressed hard against his face, hiding his eyes. His shoulders were shaking violently. The high society executive was completely gone, leaving only a terrified criminal exposed to the harsh light of justice. Chloe looked at him with absolute hatred, realizing that his careless breakdown had provided the final nail in their legal coffin. Aisha closed the laptop and delivered the final devastating blow. She handed one last set of financial documents to the judge. She explained that Julian did not just try to steal $2 million from a bank using my identity. She showed the judge the bank statements proving that Julian had systematically drained the educational trust fund I had set up for my 6-year-old grandson. She then pointed out the credit card statements showing Chloe opening fraudulent accounts in my name to fund luxury vacations and expensive hotel suites for her afternoon affairs. I looked at Chloe as Aisha mentioned the hotel suites. Her face went entirely pale. She knew I had the pictures of her fitness trainer, but she never thought I would enter them into the public court record. Her perfect suburban wife persona was completely shattered into pieces. Mr. Vance quietly began packing his leather briefcase. He did not object anymore. He did not try to defend them. He was mentally preparing to withdraw as their legal counsel the second the hearing adjourned. Judge Harrison took a long, deep breath and took off his reading glasses. He looked down at the pile of undeniable ironclad evidence in front of him. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, trembling with an intense, barely contained fury. "In my 25 years on the bench, I have seen many terrible things," Judge Harrison said, his eyes locked fiercely on Julian and Chloe. "But I have never in my entire career witnessed a more despicable, cold-blooded, and highly orchestrated campaign of elder abuse. You came into my courtroom, swore an oath to God, and attempted to use the authority of the justice system to bury an innocent man alive, simply to cover up your own financial crimes and pathetic greed. You are an absolute disgrace." The judge picked up his heavy wooden gavel and gripped it tightly. "I am dismissing this petition for conservatorship with extreme prejudice," Judge Harrison announced, his voice booming through the room. "But I am not stopping there. Based on the overwhelming evidence of financial fraud and criminal extortion presented today, I am issuing an immediate emergency injunction. Effective as of this exact second, I am ordering the total freezing of all personal and corporate bank accounts belonging to Julian and Chloe. Furthermore, I am directing the court bailiff to immediately transfer all exhibits presented today directly to the district attorney's office and the federal authorities currently investigating your commercial activities. You will not touch a single penny, and you will not leave this jurisdiction." The gavel slammed down onto the wooden block with a loud cracking sound that signaled the absolute end of their reign of terror. Julian let out a breathless, hollow gasp. His legs gave out completely, and he collapsed forward onto the heavy defense table, burying his face in his arms. He was shaking uncontrollably, sobbing as the absolute reality of his situation crashed down upon him. He had no money left. He had no companies left. His wife hated him, and federal prison was waiting for him. He realized in that agonizing moment that every single door was locked, every escape route was permanently sealed, and his entire life was completely over. The gavel had barely echoed through the courtroom before Julian and Chloe scrambled for the exit. I watched them practically run down the marble aisle, pushing past the heavy oak doors like fleeing rats escaping a sinking ship. They knew their bank accounts were officially frozen. They knew the federal agents were circling. But greedy people always think they have one last trick up their sleeve. They thought they could rush back to their sprawling suburban mansion and stash all their expensive luxury items before the authorities came knocking. They wanted to fill their designer luggage with diamond watches, custom jewelry, and cash hidden in the walls. They thought they still had a house to go back to. They were dead wrong. I did not rush. I walked out of the courthouse with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who had already won the war. I climbed into my rusty Ford truck and took the scenic route out to the wealthy gated community where they lived. Or rather, where they used to live. Aisha and my forensic accountant, Victor, had filed the paperwork for this specific moment weeks ago, timing it perfectly with the conclusion of the conservatorship hearing. By the time I turned my truck onto their pristine manicured street, the final act of their humiliation was already well underway. I parked my old truck right across the street from the massive wrought iron gates of their driveway. The gates were locked open. A large, heavy-duty moving truck was backed all the way up to the grand front doors of the estate. 2 county sheriff cruisers were parked on the lawn, their lights flashing silently in the midday sun. A crew of professional movers in matching uniforms was marching in and out of the house, carrying heavy boxes and pieces of custom furniture out to the street. Julian and Chloe had arrived just 5 minutes before me. Their leased luxury sports car was parked haphazardly on the curb. I stepped out of my truck wearing my faded denim jeans, my scuffed work boots, and an old sweat-stained baseball cap. I looked exactly like the tired old laborer they despised so much. I walked slowly up the long driveway, my hands shoved deep into my pockets, watching the absolute chaos unfold. "What are you doing?" Julian was screaming at the top of his lungs, his face bright red with panic. He was aggressively pulling at the arm of a burly mover who was carrying a flat-screen television out the front door. "Put that down right now. This is my house. You are trespassing on private property. I am calling the police." "The police are already here, sir," a stern voice replied. A large county sheriff stepped off the grand porch, resting his hand casually on his utility belt. "Step back from the workers immediately, or I will put you in handcuffs for interfering with a court-ordered mandate." Chloe was running frantically around the lawn, clutching her designer purse to her chest, her high heels sinking into the soft green grass. "Officer, you do not understand," she cried hysterically. "We live here. This is a massive mistake. My husband is a wealthy tech executive. You cannot just break into our home and take our things." The sheriff pulled a thick clipboard from under his arm and looked at it with absolute boredom. "The property address is listed under the Clarice Holding Trust," he stated coldly. "The current occupants are formally listed as delinquent tenants. A lawful eviction notice was filed, processed, and approved by a judge. We gave you the standard 30-day warning, which was mailed directly to this address. The final order went into effect exactly 1 hour ago. You have no legal right to be on these premises." Julian froze. The color drained from his face for the second time that day. He turned his head slowly and saw me standing casually by the grand stone pillar of the entrance gate. I leaned my shoulder against the cold stone, crossed my arms over my chest, and looked at him from under the brim of my old baseball cap. "You," Julian whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of disbelief and absolute terror. He stumbled toward me, ignoring the warning glare of the sheriff. "What did you do? What is the Clarice Holding Trust?" I looked at him with eyes as cold and deep as a winter ocean. "I named the trust after your mother, Julian," I told him quietly, so only he and his wife could hear. "When I bought this ridiculous, overpriced mansion for you 5 years ago, I never put your name on the deed. I put it in the holding trust. You were essentially renting this lifestyle from me, and according to Victor's financial audit, you have been so busy burning through stolen cash and taking out fraudulent loans that you stopped paying your phantom rent to the trust exactly 6 months ago." Chloe gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. "You evicted us," she stammered, stepping back as if I had just struck her. "You evicted your own son from his home. You evicted yourselves, Chloe," I replied smoothly. "I just filed the necessary paperwork to clean up your mess. Your bank accounts are frozen. Your credit cards are dead. You have absolutely zero equity in this property. Everything inside that house that was purchased with stolen money is being seized by the holding company to recuperate the massive financial damages you caused." Julian fell to his knees on the manicured grass. He looked at the movers who were now carrying out his expensive custom-tailored suits, shoving them carelessly into cheap brown cardboard boxes. All his expensive watches, his imported shoes, his modern art collection. It was all being confiscated to pay back the educational trust fund he stole from his own child. He had nothing left. He was a middle-aged man kneeling in the dirt with no money, no home, and a federal indictment waiting for him the second the sun went down. But the true destruction of his life did not come from me. It came from the woman standing next to him. Chloe stared at the cheap cardboard boxes piling up on the edge of the street. She looked at the sheriff. She looked at the locked front doors of the mansion, and finally she looked down at Julian. The mask of the devoted, supportive wife shattered permanently. She realized that Julian was no longer a ticket to a life of luxury. He was an anchor tied to her ankle, dragging her down into a bottomless ocean of poverty and federal prison time. A primal, vicious rage took over her entire body. She marched over to a pile of belongings sitting on the curb. She grabbed a heavy leather suitcase that belonged to Julian, raised it high above her head, and violently threw it right into the middle of the street. The suitcase burst open on the hard asphalt, spilling his expensive silk ties and dress shirts everywhere. "Chloe, what are you doing?" Julian cried out, scrambling to his feet, trying to reach out to her. "Do not touch me!" she screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice echoing wildly through the quiet, wealthy neighborhood. Her face was twisted with absolute hatred. She pointed a shaking finger right between his eyes. "You promised me an empire. You promised me millions. You told me you had everything under control. You said he was just a stupid, senile old man. You said taking his money would be easy. Chloe, please, we can fix this." Julian begged, tears streaming down his face as he reached for her hand. "There is no fixing this, you pathetic loser," she spat, pulling away from him as if he were covered in a deadly disease. "You have absolutely nothing. You are nothing. I am not going to federal prison because you are too stupid to outsmart a retired construction worker. We are done. Do you hear me? We are completely done." Without another word, she turned around and aggressively flagged down a passing city taxi that had just turned into the neighborhood. She did not grab any of her belongings. She did not look back at the mansion. She ripped open the taxi door, climbed inside, and slammed it shut with tremendous force. The taxi sped away down the street, disappearing around the corner. Julian stood alone on the edge of the road, surrounded by cheap cardboard boxes and scattered clothes. The sheriff locked the heavy iron gates of the mansion with a loud, final clank. Julian looked at the locked gates. He looked down the empty street where his wife had just abandoned him, and finally he looked at me. I stood perfectly still, leaning against my rusty truck, watching the arrogant king survey the absolute ashes of his ruined empire. My own son slapped me across the face at my grandson's 6th birthday party. He looked at my worn-out flannel shirt, threw my handmade gift to the floor, and screamed that I was an embarrassment. He thought he was putting a foolish, broke old man in his place. He had no idea that the very ground he was standing on, the club, his house, his entire life, belonged to me. 1 week later, a federal judge took absolutely everything he owned. I am Cornelius, 73 years old, and before I tell you exactly how I dismantled my son's arrogant life, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that disrespecting the people who built you up should come with a heavy price. Now let me take you back to the day my family made the biggest mistake of their miserable lives. Julian was left with absolutely nothing but the clothes on his back and the keys in his pocket. The repo men had not yet hooked up his imported sports car. In his blind panic, Julian thought he could outrun a federal indictment. He thought he could just turn the key, press the gas pedal, and disappear across the state line into the dark. It is a pathetic thing to watch a man who used to think he was untouchable reduced to a fleeing coward. He waited until the sun dipped below the horizon, cloaking the upscale neighborhood in shadows. I knew exactly what he was going to do. Men like Julian do not stay and face the consequences of their actions. They run. They always run. My forensic accountant Victor had already flagged Julian's passport and shared his license plate with the federal authorities. The FBI was not just waiting for him to slip up. They were counting on it. Running from an active federal fraud investigation elevates the crime from a white-collar offense to an immediate flight risk. I sat in the cab of my rusty Ford truck parked on a darkened overpass overlooking the interstate highway leading out of Georgia. I knew his route. There was only one major highway heading north toward the border, the fastest way to disappear. I rolled the windows down, letting the cool night air fill the cab. I did not turn on the radio. I just waited in the absolute silence, watching the steady stream of headlights passing below me. Down on the highway, Julian was pushing his luxury sports car well past the speed limit. I could hear the roar of the engine echoing in the distance long before I saw the vehicle. He was driving recklessly, swerving between lanes, desperately trying to put as much distance between himself and his ruined life as possible. He had no money for gas. He had no credit cards that worked. He probably thought he could sell the stolen car for cash in another state. He was completely delusional. Suddenly, the dark highway erupted into a blinding spectacle of flashing red and blue lights. They did not come from behind him. They came from everywhere. 3 unmarked black tactical vehicles merged seamlessly onto the highway from a hidden access ramp, immediately boxing Julian's sports car in on all sides. A heavily armored state patrol cruiser pulled out directly in front of him, forcing him to slam on the brakes. The screech of his expensive tires echoed through the quiet night air, leaving long black skid marks across the asphalt. Julian was completely trapped. The federal agents executed a textbook tactical block. There was nowhere for him to turn. There was nowhere left to run. I watched from the overpass, resting my forearms against the steering wheel of my truck. I had a perfect view of the entire scene unfolding below. The doors of the black tactical vehicles flew open. More than a dozen heavily armed federal agents poured out onto the highway. They were wearing thick bulletproof vests with the letters FBI printed in bold yellow across their chests. They drew their weapons and pointed them directly at the windshield of Julian's luxury car. Their voices boomed through heavy megaphones, cutting through the night air with absolute authority. They ordered him to turn off the engine, throw the keys out the window, and step out of the vehicle with his hands raised high in the air. For a long, agonizing moment, the sports car did not move. I could easily imagine the sheer paralyzing terror gripping my son inside that leather interior. He was a man who had never faced a real consequence in his entire privileged life. He was used to buying his way out of trouble, manipulating people with his money, and relying on his mother and me to clean up his messes. Now he was staring down the barrel of federal justice, and no amount of arrogance could save him. Slowly, the driver's side door opened. Julian stepped out onto the highway. His expensive suit was wrinkled and stained with sweat. His hands were shaking violently as he raised them above his head. He looked so incredibly small, stripped of all his unearned power and fake wealth. The federal agents did not treat him like a high society tech executive. They treated him like the fleeing criminal he was. Two massive agents rushed forward, grabbing him roughly by the arms. They spun him around with aggressive force and slammed him face down onto the hood of his own luxury sports car. The impact knocked the wind out of him. Julian let out a pathetic, breathless gasp as his cheek was pressed hard against the cold metal. An older federal agent stepped forward, pulled out a pair of heavy steel handcuffs, and forcefully wrenched Julian's arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the cuffs locking around his wrists echoed like a final judgment. "You are under federal arrest," the lead agent announced, his voice carrying clearly up to my vantage point. "You are being charged with multiple counts of wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and conspiracy to defraud a financial institution. You have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you use it." Julian was sobbing now. I could see his shoulders heaving as the agents patted him down, emptying his pockets. They treated him with the cold, clinical efficiency reserved for common thieves. They pulled him off the hood of the car and dragged him toward the back of an armored transport van. As they were walking him away, Julian stopped struggling for a fraction of a second. He turned his head and looked up toward the dark overpass. I do not know if he actually saw my rusty Ford truck parked in the shadows, or if he just felt the weight of my gaze staring down at him. But for one brief, agonizing moment, our eyes met across the distance. He knew I was watching. He knew this entire federal operation was the direct result of his decision to slap me across the face at a child's birthday party. I did not smile. I did not feel any sense of joyous victory. I just felt a profound, heavy emptiness. I had done what I had to do to protect my estate, my grandson, and my dignity. I watched the agents shove him into the back of the transport van and slam the heavy metal doors shut. The flashing lights faded into the distance as the convoy drove away, leaving the highway quiet once again. I turned the key in the ignition of my old truck. The engine sputtered and roared to life. I drove back to my quiet, empty house. The war was officially over. Hours later, the grandfather clock in my hallway chimed midnight. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, staring out the window into the dark street. The silence of the house was absolute. Then the sharp, jarring ring of the telephone shattered the quiet. I looked at the caller identification screen on the table. It was an automated incoming call from the Fulton County Federal Holding Facility. I let it ring 3 times. On the 4th ring, I slowly picked up the receiver and brought it to my ear. I did not say a word. An automated voice prompted me to accept a collect call from an inmate. I pressed the button to accept. Dad Julian's voice crackled through the phone line. He was weeping hysterically, his voice completely broken, stripped of all his pride and arrogance. "Dad, please. You have to help me. I am in a federal holding cell. It is cold. I am terrified. They are denying me standard bail because they say I am a massive flight risk. But the lawyer said if you come down here and sign a surety bond against your property, they will let me out. Please, Dad, I am begging you. Do not leave me in here. I am your son. I am so sorry. I will do anything. Just please post my bail." I sat perfectly still in the darkness of my living room. I listened to his desperate, pathetic sobbing. I thought about the wooden horse he had thrown on the floor. I thought about the slap that echoed across the country club ballroom. I thought about how he tried to have me locked away in an asylum just to steal the money I had worked my entire life to build. I held the phone to my ear. I remained completely silent for 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Then, without uttering a single word, I reached forward and firmly hung up the phone. The morning after Julian was locked inside a federal holding cell, I received a phone call from my lead attorney, Aisha. The news she delivered did not surprise me in the slightest. Rats, as I have learned over my 73 years on this earth, will always abandon a sinking ship. Chloe had fled. The moment she realized that throwing Julian under the bus would not save her from federal conspiracy charges, she panicked. She knew the authorities were drafting subpoenas for her involvement in the fraudulent credit cards and the forged medical documents. Instead of facing the music, she packed her most expensive designer bags, drove to the international terminal at the airport, and boarded a red-eye flight to Europe. She ran away to save her own miserable skin. But what made my blood boil, what truly demonstrated the absolute darkness inside that woman's soul, was what she left behind. She did not take her 6-year-old son with her. She did not even say a proper goodbye. She dumped Leo at the house of a casual acquaintance from her high society country club, claiming she had to leave for an emergency corporate retreat. She abandoned her own flesh and blood like a piece of heavy luggage she did not want to carry through customs. I did not waste a single second. I told Aisha to bypass standard family court procedures and file an emergency ex parte motion for immediate temporary custody. With Julian sitting in a federal penitentiary and Chloe fleeing the jurisdiction to evade federal warrants, the judge signed the custody order in less than 15 minutes. I climbed into my rusty Ford truck and drove to the affluent northern suburbs. I pulled up to a massive, sterile-looking modern mansion surrounded by high walls. I walked up to the front door holding the court order in my hand. A woman in expensive yoga clothes answered the door, looking deeply annoyed. She complained that Chloe had not answered her phone all morning and that she had a massage appointment she was going to miss because she was stuck watching someone else's kid. I did not even introduce myself. I just held up the legal document signed by a superior court judge, pushed past her into the grand foyer, and demanded to know where my grandson was. She pointed to the back living room. I walked through the vast, cold house. The floors were made of polished white marble and the furniture was sharp and uncomfortable. And there, sitting entirely alone on a massive gray rug in the center of the room, was little Leo. He was clutching his small backpack to his chest, looking small, confused, and absolutely terrified. When he looked up and saw me standing in the doorway, his lower lip began to tremble. He dropped his backpack and scrambled to his feet. He did not run to me right away. The trauma of the last few days, his mother screaming at the school, the bodyguards, the sudden abandonment, it had all taken a heavy toll on his little heart. He looked at me with wide, hesitant eyes, as if he was afraid I was just another ghost ready to disappear. I sank down onto my knees right there on the cold marble floor. I took off my old baseball cap and held my arms open wide. "It is over, little man," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "Grandpa is here. Nobody is ever going to scare you again. Let us go home." Leo let out a loud, heartbreaking sob and ran across the room. He crashed into my chest, wrapping his small arms around my neck, burying his wet face into the collar of my flannel shirt. I held him tighter than I had ever held anything in my entire life. I closed my eyes and silently promised my late wife Clarice that I would spend every remaining breath in my lungs protecting this innocent boy from the toxic wreckage his parents had left behind. I carried him out of that cold, soulless mansion. I strapped him safely into the passenger seat of my rusty Ford truck. As I started the engine, I noticed how exhausted he looked. The dark circles under his small eyes mirrored the pain he had endured. But as the truck rumbled down the highway, the steady, familiar vibration of the old engine seemed to soothe him. By the time we crossed into my quiet neighborhood, he had fallen fast asleep, his head resting gently against the window. I carried him inside my house. It was not a multi-million-dollar estate. It did not have gates or private security, but it had something Julian and Chloe's house never had. It had a soul. As soon as we walked through the front door, the warm, comforting atmosphere of the old house embraced us. Even though Clarice had been gone for years, the house still carried the faint, sweet aroma of vanilla cinnamon and old oak. It smelled exactly like the Sunday mornings when she used to bake fresh bread for the neighborhood. It was the scent of safety. It was the scent of unconditional love. I laid Leo down gently on the soft couch in the living room and draped a thick woven blanket over him. I sat in my old leather armchair and just watched him sleep. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the heavy burden of anger and vengeance lifted from my shoulders. The war was over. The empire had been purged of its rot. Now the only thing left to do was rebuild. Hours later, the sun began to set, casting a warm golden light through the living room windows. Leo slowly blinked his eyes open. He sat up, rubbing his face, looking around the cozy room. He saw me sitting in the chair, and a small, tentative smile crossed his face. He felt safe. He knew he was exactly where he belonged. I stood up and walked over to the hall closet. I reached up to the top shelf and pulled down a battered cardboard box. It was the same box I had carried into the Oak Ridge Country Club a week ago. I brought it over to the coffee table and sat down next to him. "I have something for you, Leo," I said softly. "I know your birthday party was ruined, and I am so sorry for that, but I still want you to have your present." I opened the top of the cardboard box and pulled out the wooden horse. I had spent hours the night before carefully gluing and sanding the leg that Julian had violently broken off. You could barely see the crack in the wood. It was mended solid and whole again, just like our family was going to be. Leo gasped, his eyes lighting up with genuine joy. He took the wooden horse in his small hands, running his fingers over the smooth, polished wood. He hugged it tightly to his chest. "Thank you, Grandpa," he whispered. "It is the best present ever." I smiled, reaching out to gently ruffle his hair. "I am glad you like it, little man. But that is only the first part of your gift. Look inside the box. There is something else in there." Leo set the wooden horse down on the table and leaned over the cardboard box. He reached his small hand inside and pulled out a thick, heavy stack of legal documents bound in a dark blue leather cover. He looked at the papers confused, not understanding the dense legal jargon printed on the thick parchment. He looked up at me, tilting his head. "What is this, Grandpa?" he asked innocently. I looked at that stack of papers. Those papers were the reason Julian had slapped me. They were the reason Julian thought I was a broke, pathetic old fool who brought trash to a high society party. He had been so blinded by his own arrogance and greed that he never bothered to look beneath the wooden toy. "That my boy is your future," I told him, my voice steady and absolute. It was a fully executed, irrevocable trust fund contract. It was seeded with exactly $5 million in diversified commercial real estate assets. The contract was legally bound, completely untouchable, and entirely insulated from the outside world. It was designed to pay for his education, his first home, and whatever dreams he wanted to pursue when he grew up. Julian had thrown that box onto the marble floor. He had literally thrown away his own son's guaranteed multi-million-dollar empire because he was too busy trying to impress people who did not care about him. "You do not have to worry about what it says right now," I told Leo gently, taking the heavy documents and placing them back into the box. "All you need to know is that as long as I am breathing, and long after I am gone, you will always be taken care of. Nobody will ever take anything away from you again." Leo did not care about the papers. He did not know what $5 million meant. He just picked up his wooden horse, climbed onto my lap, and rested his head against my chest. And in that quiet, peaceful moment, surrounded by the warmth of my home, I knew that every single ruthless decision I had made over the last 7 days was absolutely worth it. 2 weeks had passed since the federal agents pulled Julian from his luxury sports car in the middle of the highway. I drove my rusty Ford truck up to the towering gates of the Federal Correctional Institution. The building was a massive fortress of gray concrete and coiled razor wire. It was a cold, brutal place designed to break arrogant men down to their absolute core. I parked my truck and walked through the security checkpoints. I surrendered my belongings to the guards. I was still wearing my faded denim jeans and my old red flannel shirt. I sat down in the sterile visitor room. A thick panel of bulletproof glass separated me from the empty metal chair on the other side. I did not have to wait very long. A heavy steel door buzzed loudly and slid open. 2 armed guards escorted a prisoner into the room. It took me a full second to recognize my own son. The physical transformation was absolute and devastating. The 38-year-old tech executive who used to spend hours polishing his image was completely gone. Julian looked like a hollow, empty shell of a human being. He had lost at least 15 pounds in just 14 days. His skin was pale and sickly. The expensive spray tans and spa treatments had washed away completely. His hair, once perfectly styled with imported products, was flat and greasy. He was wearing a baggy, bright orange canvas jumpsuit that swallowed his shrinking frame. He shuffled toward the chair. His shoulders were slumped. His eyes darted around the room with the nervous, frantic energy of a hunted animal. He sat down heavily and picked up the black plastic telephone receiver. His hands were shaking so violently he could barely hold the plastic to his ear. I picked up my receiver and waited for him to speak. I expected him to apologize. I expected him to beg for forgiveness, just like he did when he crawled on my living room floor. But the human ego is a stubborn, toxic disease. Julian looked at me through the thick glass, and his bloodshot eyes filled with a desperate, venomous anger. He gritted his teeth and his jaw trembled. "You are a monster," he hissed through the phone line. His voice was raspy and broken. "You did this to me. You destroyed my company. You took my house. You took my wife. Chloe abandoned me and fled the country because of you. You left me in here to rot like an animal. What kind of father does this to his own flesh and blood? You are cold-blooded. You have absolutely no heart." I listened to his pathetic accusations without changing a single muscle in my face. I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of anger or sorrow. The time for emotional reactions had passed a long time ago. "I did not put you in that orange jumpsuit, Julian," I said. My voice was steady and flat. "Your greed put you in that jumpsuit. Your arrogance locked that steel door behind you. You stole from your own son. You forged legal documents. You tried to throw me into a psychiatric ward so you could steal the money I worked my entire life to build. I simply stopped being your victim." Julian pressed his forehead against the cold glass. He was breathing heavily. His breath fogged up the thick pain. "I just needed a little more time," he cried. The anger suddenly dissolved into pathetic desperation. "If you had just given me the money, I could have fixed the business. I could have paid everything back. We could have been a normal family. But you chose your hidden money over your own son." I looked at him with a profound, chilling calmness. I leaned closer to the glass so he could hear every single syllable clearly. "You slapped me in public because you thought I was weak," I told him. Every word dropped from my mouth like a heavy stone. "You sit in this prison today because you thought you were smarter than me. You thought power was the imported car you drove. You thought power was the tailored suits you wore and the country club memberships you bought with stolen money. But you were wrong, Julian. True power does not lie in the car you drive. True power lies in your ability to control your own greed." Julian stared at me. His eyes grew wide and vacant as my words began to strike the core of his shattered reality. "You thought I was a broke old man because I wore flannel shirts and drove a rusty truck," I continued. My voice echoed through the quiet receiver. "You were so blinded by the shiny illusions of wealth that you never bothered to look beneath the surface. You threw away a wooden horse at your son's birthday party because you thought it was cheap garbage. You threw it on the floor to humiliate me. You did not know that sitting at the very bottom of that cardboard box was an irrevocable trust fund contract. It was a legally binding document guaranteeing $5 million in diversified commercial real estate. It was your son's future completely secured, and I was ready to give you the world, Julian. I was ready to hand you the keys to a quiet, massive empire. All you had to do was be a decent man. All you had to do was be a father. But you chose to be a thief." The blood drained completely from Julian's face. His lips parted, but no sound came out. The realization of what he had actually done hit him with the devastating force of a speeding train. He had literally held $5 million in his hands. He had held a lifetime of financial security and generational wealth freely given by a father who loved him. And he had thrown it onto a marble floor because it did not look expensive enough for his wealthy friends to see. The cognitive dissonance snapped his mind in half. He realized in that agonizing, breathless second that all his scheming and all his forgery and all his ruthless betrayals were completely unnecessary. He had destroyed his entire existence, his marriage, his reputation, and his freedom for absolutely nothing. Julian let out a guttural, suffocating gasp. The black plastic telephone receiver slipped from his trembling fingers. It fell and dangled from its short metal cord, swinging gently against the glass wall. His knees gave out beneath the metal table. He collapsed forward, burying his face into his arms against the hard surface of the visitor counter. His shoulders heaved violently as he began to sob uncontrollably. It was not a cry of anger. It was not a cry of fear. It was the absolute devastating wail of a man whose soul had just been crushed by the tremendous weight of his own profound stupidity. He cried endlessly as the terrible truth washed over him. He realized he had traded a father who was willing to give him the entire world for a pathetic mirage of wealth that evaporated into thin air in exactly 1 week. I sat on the wooden dock watching the morning mist roll slowly across the quiet waters of the lake. The air smelled of pine needles and damp earth. It was a crisp, cool morning just a few months after the storm that had completely ripped my family apart. Parked on the dirt road behind the cabin was my rusty Ford truck. It looked exactly the same as it always did. I looked exactly the same too. I still wore my faded denim jeans and my heavy work boots. But the world around me had profoundly changed. Sitting right next to me on the edge of the dock with his little legs dangling over the water was my grandson Leo. He was holding a small red fishing rod, keeping his eyes fixed intently on the red and white bobber floating on the calm surface of the lake. Sitting safely inside his open tackle box right next to the extra fishing hooks was the wooden horse I had carved for him. He never went anywhere without it. The deep, ugly crack in its wooden leg was still visible, but it was glued back together solid and strong. It was a daily reminder that broken things can be fixed if you handle them with care and patience. The dark, heavy circles under Leo's eyes were completely gone. The terrifying memories of his mother screaming in the school courtyard and abandoning him in a cold, empty house had slowly begun to fade away. They were replaced by the simple, innocent joys of childhood. He spent his days learning how to skip stones across the water, planting vegetables in the backyard, and helping me sand down rough pieces of oak in my workshop. He was learning the value of hard work. He was learning that true safety does not come from living behind the iron gates of a multi-million-dollar mansion. It comes from knowing that the person sitting next to you will never abandon you no matter how hard things get. I looked out across the vast expanse of the lake and let out a long, deep breath. The heavy, suffocating burden I had carried for months was finally gone. The legal fallout from my son's arrogant greed had been absolute and devastating. Julian did not even try to fight the federal charges in a trial. Once his high-priced defense attorney saw the mountain of undeniable evidence Aisha and Victor had compiled, they advised him to surrender completely. Julian accepted a federal plea deal. He was sentenced to 15 years in a maximum security penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. He will be an old, broken man by the time he ever walks out of those concrete walls. Chloe did not fare any better. She thought she could outrun a federal indictment by hiding in a luxury villa overseas, but the authorities do not forgive wire fraud and identity theft. Federal agents tracked her fraudulent credit card usage straight to a boutique hotel in Europe. She was arrested by international authorities, held in a foreign detention center, and unceremoniously extradited back to the United States in handcuffs. She is currently awaiting trial, and she is facing a very long sentence in a federal women's prison. The sprawling suburban mansion they used to live in was sold to a lovely young family. The imported sports cars and the designer wardrobes were auctioned off by the federal government to pay down the massive mountain of debt they left behind. Their entire fake empire of smoke and mirrors was completely erased from the face of the earth. But my empire, the real empire built on decades of blood, sweat, and poured concrete, was stronger than it had ever been. Aisha and Victor came out to the lake cabin a few weeks ago with a new stack of legal documents. I did not hesitate to sign them. I permanently restructured the entire master holding company and the Clarice Trust Fund. I took the millions of dollars that Julian and Chloe had tried to steal, and I redirected every single penny of it. My commercial real estate empire now funds a massive educational charity foundation. The profits from those downtown high-rises and suburban shopping centers do not buy imported sports cars anymore. They buy college scholarships for underprivileged kids in the inner cities of Atlanta and Chicago. They buy textbooks and computers for children who actually know what it means to struggle. They fund vocational schools for young men and women who want to learn how to build things with their own two hands. I took the toxic, ugly greed of my son and I turned it into a foundation that will help thousands of children build a real, honest future. That is the true legacy of my late wife, Clarice. That is the kind of wealth that actually means something. Leo tugged on my sleeve, pointing excitedly at his fishing rod. The red and white bobber was dipping violently beneath the surface of the dark water. I smiled and placed my large, calloused hands over his small fingers, teaching him how to slowly reel in the line. I told him not to rush. I told him that if you pull too hard and too fast, you will snap the line and lose everything. You have to be patient, I whispered to him. You have to let the fish tire itself out, and then you bring it home gently. Leo nodded, his eyes wide with focus and determination. He turned the small handle of the reel with steady, measured movements, just like I taught him. A few moments later, a small silver fish breached the surface of the water, splashing in the morning sun. Leo's face lit up with absolute pure joy. He looked at me with a brilliant, proud smile. I patted him on the back and told him he did a perfect job. We released the small fish back into the lake, watching it swim away into the deep water. Leo leaned his head against my arm, swinging his legs over the edge of the wooden dock. The morning sun was warm against our skin. The world was quiet and still. I realized in that beautiful, peaceful moment that I had finally won. I had successfully protected the only two things in this world that truly mattered to me. I protected my grandson's future, and I protected my own peace. Life is full of hard, cruel lessons, but the most important ones are often learned in the quiet aftermath of a massive storm. Power is never about the volume of your voice or the price tag on your clothes. True power is rooted in patience and observation. Greed blinds people, making them underestimate the quiet strength of those who built their foundation from the ground up. When family replaces loyalty with transaction, they strip away their own safety net. Revenge isn't about matching cruelty with cruelty. It is about stepping back and allowing the arrogant to be crushed by the weight of their own consequences. Protect your peace, secure your boundaries, and never apologize for outsmarting those who plotted your downfall. Did you like my story? Let me know which city you are listening from in the comments below. If you found value in this story, please support me by leaving a like and subscribing to the channel so I can keep bringing you more stories just like this one. Thank you so much for your sweet support, and I am looking forward to reading your comments. See you in the next life story with love and respect.